A gunshot cracks through the frontier town, and the woman standing in the crossfire isn't some lost traveler. She's Clara Whitmore, running from a scandal that destroyed everything she had back east. Now she's claiming land she's never seen, in a place that doesn't want her, saved by a man who trusts no one. Can a disgraced city woman survive the brutal West? Or will this land break her like it's broken so many before? Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, throwing Clara Whitmore against the worn leather seat hard enough to bruise. Dust billowed through the window gaps, coating her already grimy traveling dress in another layer of prairie grit. She'd been on this miserable route for 8 days, and every bone in her body felt it. "Red Hollow," the driver shouted. "End of the line." Clara peered through the dust cloud at what could barely be called a town. A dozen buildings, maybe fewer, scattered along a single rutted road like someone had tossed them from a wagon and left them where they landed. The largest structure was a saloon, its false front painted an optimistic red that had faded to the color of old blood. Everything else looked temporary, as if the whole settlement might pack up and blow away in a strong wind. This was it. This was what she'd traded Boston for. She gathered her 2 bags. Everything she owned now fit in 2 bags, and stepped down onto soil that had never known a paved street. The driver didn't offer to help. He just tossed her trunk onto the dirt and clicked his tongue at the horses, already turning the coach around. "Wait," Clara called. "Is there a hotel? Boarding house?" He pointed with his whip at a narrow building that leaned slightly to the left. "Widow Krantz, she'll take your money." Then he was gone, the coach rattling back the way it had come, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the street. The sun beat down with a meanness she'd never experienced in New England. Sweat trickled down her spine. Her corset, proper and fitted for Boston drawing rooms, felt like a torture device out here. She bent to lift her trunk, and that's when the first shot rang out. Clara froze. The crack of gunfire echoed off the buildings, and for a moment her mind couldn't process what she was hearing. Then came another shot, and suddenly men were running, some toward the sound, some away from it. "Get down!" someone shouted. Clara didn't move fast enough. A man in a dark coat burst from the saloon, gun drawn, firing behind him as he ran. 2 others followed, returning fire. The air filled with the smell of powder and the sharp reports of pistols firing too close, too real. She should drop. She should run. But her body wouldn't obey, locked in place by pure shock as the gunfight erupted around her like something from a dime novel. Except this was real, and the bullets were real, and one of them just splintered the post 6 inches from her head. Then something hit her from the side, not a bullet, but a solid wall of muscle and wool. Arms wrapped around her waist, and she was moving, being dragged, her feet barely touching ground as someone hauled her bodily behind a water trough. "Stay down," a voice growled in her ear. Male, rough, brooking no argument. Clara found herself pressed against weathered wood, her face inches from the man who'd grabbed her. He was crouched over her, shielding her with his own body. And what she saw was not reassuring. He was big, broad-shouldered, with several days of dark stubble and eyes that looked like they'd seen things she couldn't imagine. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His shirt was work-worn, his hands calloused, and the way he held himself suggested he was no stranger to violence. Another shot rang out. The man didn't even flinch. "You picked a hell of a day to visit," he said. "I'm not visiting." The words came out before she could stop them. "I live here now." His eyes narrowed. "That's so." More gunfire, shouting, the sound of boots running, and then a voice Clara would come to know as Sheriff Porter's. "That's enough! Drop your weapons or I start dropping you." The shooting stopped. The sudden silence felt almost as violent as the noise had been. The man above her didn't move right away. He waited, listening, his body tense and ready. Only when the sheriff called, "Clear," did he ease back, giving Clara room to breathe. She sat up, her whole body shaking now that the danger had passed. Her dress was ruined, covered in dirt and what might have been horse manure. Her carefully pinned hair had come loose. She looked, she was certain, like exactly what she was, a fool who had no business being here. "Thank you," she managed. He stood, offering her a hand. When she took it, his grip was firm, pulling her to her feet with an ease that suggested she weighed nothing. "Caleb Boone," he said. "You want to tell me why someone who talks like you just stepped out of a finishing school thinks she lives in Red Hollow?" Clara brushed at her dress, a futile gesture. Clara Whitmore. My uncle was Henry Whitmore. He passed 2 months ago and left me his ranch. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite surprised, but close. The Whitmore place. Yes. That's 8 miles north of here. Hard land. Henry barely kept it going, and he knew what he was doing. Then I'll learn. Caleb looked at her like she'd just said she planned to fly to the moon. Learn. Yes. Ma'am, no offense, but you don't look like you've done a day's ranch work in your life. I haven't. Clara met his gaze, refusing to look away. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he shook his head, the gesture more resigned than dismissive. Your funeral. Widow Krantz runs the boarding house. Get yourself cleaned up, and for the love of... He stopped himself. Just stay out of the street when you hear shooting. He turned to leave. Mr. Boone, Clara called. Why were they shooting? Card game went bad. Happens. Often? Often enough. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that might have been politeness or mockery. She couldn't tell. Welcome to Red Hollow, Miss Whitmore. Then he was gone, his long stride carrying him toward the saloon where men were being herded out at gunpoint by Sheriff Porter. Clara watched him go. This man who'd saved her life without hesitation, then dismissed her just as quickly. She picked up her bags and started toward the boarding house, her legs still unsteady. Around her, the town was already returning to normal, as if gunfights in the street were just another part of the afternoon. Maybe they were. The boarding house door stuck, swollen from heat or humidity or just age. Clara had to shove it with her shoulder to get it open. Inside was dark and smelled of old coffee and lye soap. Hello? She called. A woman appeared from a back room, wiping her hands on an apron. She was maybe 50, maybe 70. The frontier seemed to age people in ways Clara couldn't quite calculate. Her face was weathered, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes were sharp. You must be Henry's niece, she said. Whole town's been talking about you for 2 weeks. Clara set down her bags. You're Mrs. Krantz? Widow Krantz, and yes. The woman looked her over with the assessing gaze of someone who'd seen plenty of fools come and go. Room's $2 a week, meals included. You'll share with the school teacher unless you want to pay for private, which is $4. Shared is fine. Thought so. Widow Krantz gestured toward a narrow staircase. Second door on the left, supper's at 6. Don't be late, I don't reheat. Clara carried her bags upstairs, found the room, barely large enough for 2 narrow beds and a washstand, and sat down on the lumpy mattress. Through the thin walls, she could hear voices, footsteps, the sounds of a building that held too many people in too little space. This was her life now. She'd left Boston in disgrace, her engagement broken, her reputation destroyed by rumors she couldn't fight. The story had spread through her social circle like wildfire. Clara Whitmore, caught in a compromising position with a married man. It didn't matter that she'd been innocent, that Henry Ashford had cornered her at a party, and she'd been trying to leave when his wife walked in. The damage was done. Her family had looked at her with shame and disappointment. Her friends had stopped calling, and the man she'd been engaged to, proper, respectable Thomas, had ended things by letter. She'd had nothing left. And then the lawyer's letter had arrived, informing her that an uncle she'd met exactly twice had died and left her a ranch in Montana Territory. It had seemed like providence, an escape, a fresh start, a chance to be someone new somewhere no one knew her name. Looking at the peeling wallpaper and the cigarette burn on the nightstand, Clara wasn't sure providence was the right word, but she was here. And she wasn't going back. She washed her face in the basin, changed into a slightly less ruined dress, and went downstairs for supper. The dining room held one long table, already crowded with boarders. Widow Krantz waved her to an empty seat between a man who smelled strongly of whiskey and a thin woman with ink stains on her fingers, the schoolteacher, presumably. You're Henry's niece, like the schoolteacher said. It wasn't a question. I'm Margaret Collins. I teach the children, what few there are. Clara Whitmore. I know, everyone knows. Margaret ladled stew onto Clara's plate. They're taking bets on how long you last. Clara's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Excuse me? At the saloon. Current odds are 3 weeks before you sell and go back east. Margaret said this matter-of-factly, without malice. Don't take it personal. They bet on everything. What do you think? Clara asked. Margaret studied her. I think you've got something to prove. That can make a person stubborn. Stubbornness counts for a lot out here. She paused. You know anything about ranching? Nothing. You know anyone in Red Hollow? No one. You got money to hire help? Clara hesitated. Some. Not much. The lawyer had been clear. The ranch came with debts. Her uncle had been borrowing against future cattle sales that never materialized. She had enough for maybe 2 months of supplies, if she was careful. Margaret nodded as if Clara had confirmed something. Then you better find someone willing to teach you, and fast. That land won't wait for you to figure it out. After supper, Clara walked out onto the boarding house porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she'd had the energy to appreciate them. The street was quiet now, the earlier violence already forgotten. She thought about the ranch waiting 8 miles north, land she'd never seen, work she didn't know how to do, a future that seemed impossible from where she stood. And she thought about Caleb Boone, the way he'd looked at her like she was already defeated. Maybe she was. Maybe the smart thing would be to sell, cut her losses, find some other town where she could start over with cash in hand instead of dirt and debt. But Clara had spent her whole life doing the smart thing, the proper thing, and it had gotten her nowhere. Propriety hadn't saved her in Boston. Maybe impropriety would serve her better here. The next morning, she borrowed a horse from Widow Krantz. You can ride, can't you? Of course, Clara lied and set out for the ranch. The ride was 8 miles of misery. The horse, a plodding mare named Bess, seemed to sense Clara's inexperience and took advantage, stopping to crop grass whenever she felt like it. Clara's back ached, her thighs burned, and by the time the ranch came into view, she was fairly certain she'd never walk normally again. The house was small, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. The barn was larger, but in worse repair, its roof sagging on one side. Fences that had once marked corrals were broken in multiple places, posts rotting, wire tangled. The whole place had an air of defeat, of a man who'd been losing ground for years. Clara dismounted, more fell than dismounted, and stood looking at what was now hers. It's worse than I thought, she said to Bess, who ignored her. She walked through the house first. One main room with a fireplace, a smaller bedroom, a kitchen area with a hand pump that groaned when she worked it, but did eventually produce water. The furniture was rough but functional. Dust covered everything. Her uncle's possessions were still here, clothes in the bedroom, dishes on the shelves, a Bible on the table. It felt like walking into someone's life that had simply stopped. The barn was worse. She counted 15 head of cattle in the far pasture, thin and scattered. There should have been more. The papers the lawyer had sent mentioned a herd of 40. Either her uncle had sold them before he died, or they'd wandered off, or something else had happened. She didn't know enough to guess. She was standing in the barn, trying to figure out if the roof could be patched or needed replacing entirely, when she heard hoofbeats. Caleb Boone rode into the yard on a big roan gelding, sitting the saddle like he'd been born on it. He took in the scene, Clara in her borrowed clothes, the rundown buildings, the air of general disaster, and dismounted. "Thought you might be out here," he said. "Mr. Boone." "Caleb." He tied his horse to a post that looked like it might collapse under the weight. "Widow Krantz said you borrowed Bess. Figured you didn't know the way, so I came to make sure you didn't get lost. I found it fine." "I can see that." He walked past her into the barn, his eyes taking in details she probably didn't even recognize. "Roof needs work. Feed storage is empty. You got maybe 2 months before winter, and if you don't have hay put up by then, those cattle will starve." Clara felt something tight and defensive rise in her chest. "I'm aware the place needs work." "Work?" Caleb turned to face her. "Miss Whitmore, this place needs a miracle, and you need about 5 years of experience you don't have." "Then I'll learn quickly." Learning ranching isn't like learning piano. You make a mistake, animals die. You make enough mistakes, you die. "Why are you here?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "If you think I'm going to fail, why bother writing out?" For a moment he didn't answer. Then he sighed, the sound of a man doing something against his better judgment. "Henry was a good man, stubborn, didn't always ask for help when he should have, but good. If he thought enough of you to leave you this place, maybe there's something I'm not seeing. Or maybe he had no one else. That too." Caleb looked around the barn again. You got two choices. Way I see it. You can sell this place to someone who knows what they're doing, probably get $300–400 for the land and what's left of the herd, and go start over somewhere easier. Or you can stay and let me teach you enough to maybe survive the winter. Clara stared at him. Why would you do that? Because watching someone fail when you could have helped is a sin. He said it simply, like it was obvious. I got a ranch 5 miles west. I can spare a few hours most days, show you the basics. But I'm not doing the work for you, and I'm not guaranteeing anything. You want to make this work? You're going to break your back doing it. Fair warning. She should have been grateful. She should have thanked him and accepted immediately. But something in his tone, that assumption that she'd need saving, that she couldn't possibly do this alone, made her bristle. What if I don't want your help? Caleb raised an eyebrow. Then I'll come back in 2 months to buy your cattle off the estate after you freeze to death. He headed for his horse. Up to you, Miss Whitmore. I'll be here tomorrow at dawn if you want to learn how to fix a fence. If you don't, I won't bother you again. He mounted up and rode off without waiting for an answer, leaving Clara standing in the barn, feeling somehow both rescued and insulted. She looked around at the work waiting for her, the impossible, overwhelming amount of work, and made her decision. Dawn came early in Montana. Clara was up before the sun, dressed in the sturdiest clothes she owned, which weren't very sturdy, and waiting by the fence when Caleb rode in. He looked surprised to see her, though he hid it quickly. Figured you might sleep in, he said. You said dawn. I did. He dismounted and pulled tools from his saddlebag. You got gloves? Clara looked at her bare hands. No. You will by the end of today. He tossed her a pair of worn leather gloves that were far too big. These'll do for now. Come on. He walked her to the nearest broken fence and proceeded to give her the fastest, most overwhelming lesson in fence repair she could have imagined. He talked about post depth and wire tension and maintaining straight lines, his hands moving with practiced efficiency while Clara struggled to keep up. When he handed her the post hole digger, she nearly dropped it. It's heavy, she said stupidly. It's going to get heavier. He positioned her hands correctly. Dig here. 3 feet down. 3 feet sounded reasonable until she actually started digging. The ground was hard, packed clay mixed with rocks, and every thrust of the digger sent jolts through her shoulders. After 10 minutes, she'd managed maybe 6 inches. Caleb watched without comment. When she stopped to catch her breath, he just said, Keep going. I am. Faster would be better. We got a dozen posts to set today. A dozen. Clara looked at the hole she'd barely started and wanted to cry. Instead, she gritted her teeth and kept digging. By noon, they'd set 3 posts. Clara's hands were blistered even through the gloves. Her back screamed, and she was fairly certain she'd never be able to lift her arms above her head again. Caleb worked beside her, doing the job she couldn't manage yet, his movements economical and sure. We'll break for lunch, he said, though it sounded more like a concession to her weakness than an actual need. Clara had packed bread and cheese from Widow Krantz's kitchen. She offered to share, and Caleb accepted with a nod. They sat in the shade of the barn, eating in silence. You're slower than I expected, he said finally. Clara bristled. I've been working as fast as I can. I know, that's the problem. He took another bite of bread. You're using your arms. Use your whole body. Legs, back, shoulders. You're stronger than you think. You just don't know how to use it yet. Show me. He did, and she tried again, and it was marginally better. Marginally. They worked until dark, setting 9 posts total. Clara's count had been optimistic. She'd managed maybe 2 on her own, Caleb doing the rest while she strung wire and tried not to get tangled in it. When he finally declared them done for the day, Clara could barely walk to Bess. The ride back to town was agony. Widow Krantz took one look at her and pointed to the bathhouse out back. Soak before supper, or you won't be able to move tomorrow. Clara soaked. It helped, but not enough. The next morning, Caleb was back at dawn, and the next, and the next. He taught her about cattle, how to approach them, how to read their behavior, how to spot illness before it became catastrophic. He taught her about feed and water requirements, about rotating pastures, about the 100 small things that meant the difference between animals that thrived and animals that died. He taught her to ride properly, not the side saddle posting she'd learned in Boston, but real riding, astride and balanced, moving with the horse instead of fighting it. The first time she managed a canter without bouncing like a sack of grain, he actually smiled. Better, was all he said, but it felt like a victory. The work was brutal. Clara fell into bed each night too exhausted to think, and woke each morning to muscles that screamed in protest. Her hands, soft from a life of needlework and piano, hardened into something she barely recognized. Calluses formed. Blisters healed into tough skin. She learned to wrap minor cuts and bruises without flinching. She also learned that Caleb Boone was not an easy teacher. He had no patience for mistakes she'd already made, no sympathy for tiredness or discomfort. When she complained about the heat, he handed her a canteen. When she struggled with a gate latch, he showed her once and expected her to remember. When she asked if they could stop early one day because her head ached, he looked at her like she'd suggested setting the barn on fire. "Cows don't care if your head hurts," he said. "They need feeding anyway." But he also didn't leave. Every morning, dawn or just after, he showed up. And slowly, grudgingly, she improved. 3 weeks in, she managed to set a fence post without his help. He inspected it, tugged the wire, and nodded. Straight enough? It was the closest thing to praise he'd given, and Clara felt absurdly proud. That evening, she stayed at the ranch instead of riding back to town. It seemed foolish to make the trip twice a day when she had a house here, even if it meant sleeping alone in a building that creaked and settled in ways that kept her awake half the night. She was washing her single plate in the basin when Caleb knocked on the doorframe. "Wanted to check you had enough wood for the stove," he said. "I do." He nodded but didn't leave. After a moment, he said, "You're doing better than I expected." Clara turned to face him, surprised. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a fact." He leaned against the doorframe, his hat in his hands. "Most people would have quit by now, gone back to town, sold the place, moved on." "I told you I wasn't leaving." "You did." He studied her, his expression thoughtful. "Why'd you really come here, Miss Whitmore?" Montana's a long way from Boston for someone with no ties to the land. Clara considered lying, giving him some sanitized version that made her look less pathetic, but she was too tired for pretense. "I didn't have anywhere else to go." "Family? They're better off without me." Caleb waited, not pushing, just giving her space to continue, or not. It was different from the prying questions she'd endured in Boston, the gossip disguised as concern. There was no judgment in his face, just quiet attention. "I was engaged," she said finally, "to a man my parents approved of. Good family, good prospects, everything proper. And then there was a situation, a misunderstanding, and suddenly I wasn't respectable anymore. Thomas ended the engagement. My parents suggested I go stay with relatives for a while, let the talk die down. Then the lawyer's letter came about Uncle Henry, and it seemed like—" She trailed off. "An escape," Caleb finished. "Yes." He put his hat back on. "Well, you picked a hard place to escape to." "Better than where I was." "Maybe." He pushed off from the doorframe. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we're moving the cattle to the north pasture. You're going to need your energy." He left, and Clara watched through the window as he rode away into the gathering dark. She realized she'd just told him more about herself than she'd told anyone in Red Hollow, and he'd simply accepted it without drama or speculation. It was unsettling and oddly comfortable. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of work and learning and slow, incremental progress. Clara's world narrowed to the ranch, the cattle, the endless tasks that ranching required. She learned which cows were likely to bolt and which would stand calm while she checked them for injury. She learned to throw her weight into a stubborn gate, to read the sky for rain, to calculate how many days of feed she had left. She learned that Caleb was harder on her than he probably needed to be because he was trying to compress years of knowledge into weeks. And she learned that despite his gruff manner, he noticed things, like the day she forgot to eat lunch and he showed up with extra food in his saddlebag, or the morning she was limping from a twisted ankle and he quietly took over the heaviest work without making her ask. The town began to notice too. When she rode through on supply runs, conversations would pause, then resume with a different quality. At the mercantile, old Mr. Peterson started saving her good rope instead of selling it to whoever came in first. Widow Krantz packed her extra biscuits. Even Sheriff Porter, gruff and weathered, nodded when he saw her. "Heard you're still out at the Whitmore place," he said one afternoon. "I am." "Heard Caleb Boone's been teaching you." "He has." Porter studied her with eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. "Keep at it. This country breaks most people. Nice to see one who might bend instead." It wasn't exactly encouragement, but coming from Porter, it might as well have been. 6 weeks after she'd arrived, Clara woke before dawn to find frost on the ground. The first real cold snap, Caleb had warned her it was coming. She dressed quickly, started a fire in the stove, and went out to check the cattle. They were huddled together in the near pasture, their breath steaming. She counted heads automatically now, a habit Caleb had drilled into her. Always count. Always know if someone's missing. 15, same as always. All accounted for. She was heading back to the house when she heard it, a low, distressed sound from the far side of the barn. Clara found her there, the cow Caleb had warned her about, the wild one, the one that didn't like people, the one they'd been planning to sell. She was down, sides heaving, clearly in labor and clearly in trouble. Clara's mind raced. She'd seen Caleb assist with a difficult birth once, had watched him reach in and reposition a calf that was coming wrong. But she'd never done it herself, and this cow was mean on a good day. On a day when she was in pain and vulnerable, she'd be dangerous. The smart thing would be to ride for Caleb. His ranch was only 5 miles away. She could be there and back with help in under 2 hours. But the cow might not have 2 hours. Clara made her decision. She approached slowly, talking in the low, steady voice Caleb had taught her. The cow's eye rolled white, but she was too exhausted to rise. Clara knelt in the dirt, still talking, and reached out carefully. The cow kicked. Clara jerked back just in time, her heart hammering. "Easy," she said. "I'm trying to help you." She tried again, moving slower this time, her hand on the cow's flank. The contractions were coming hard, but nothing was happening. The calf was stuck, she was sure of it. Clara had never felt more out of her depth. This wasn't fences or feeding schedules. This was life and death, and she had no idea what she was doing. But she was here, and the cow needed help, and there was no one else. She took a breath, sent up a wordless hope that she wouldn't make things worse, and got to work. Clara's hand shook as she knelt beside the laboring cow. The animal's breathing came in ragged gasps, her sides slick with sweat despite the morning cold. Clara had watched Caleb do this once, just once, and now she was supposed to replicate what had looked so certain when he'd done it. She rolled up her sleeves. The cow's eye fixed on her, wild and afraid, but she didn't have the strength left to fight. Clara reached forward, feeling for the calf, her inexperience making every movement hesitant. The textbook knowledge Caleb had tried to drill into her head seemed useless now, abstract words that had nothing to do with the reality of muscle and membrane and the very real possibility that she was about to kill them both. The calf was there, but positioned wrong. One leg back, the head turned. Clara's stomach dropped. This was exactly the scenario Caleb had warned her about, the kind of birth that could end badly, even with experience. "Come on," she whispered, to the cow or herself or both. "We can do this." She worked carefully, trying to remember everything Caleb had shown her. Push the calf back slightly, find the leg, bring it forward. Her arms ached. Sweat dripped into her eyes despite the frost on the ground. The cow groaned, a sound so raw and exhausted it made Clara want to cry. Then something shifted. The leg came forward and suddenly the position was right. The cow bore down with the next contraction, and Clara guided the calf as it came, slippery and impossibly heavy, into the dirt. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. The calf lay still, membrane covering its nose, and Clara's heart stopped. She'd failed. She'd done everything wrong, and now the calf twitched, then coughed. Clara tore away the membrane from its face and watched as it took its first shuddering breath. She sat back hard in the dirt, her whole body trembling. The cow was already turning, exhausted but alive, beginning the instinctive work of cleaning her calf. The little thing, a heifer, Clara noted absently, was trying to figure out her legs, all wobble in determination. Clara laughed. It came out half sob, but she didn't care. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd actually done it. She was still sitting there, covered in birth fluids and dirt, when she heard hoofbeats. Caleb rode into the yard faster than usual, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. His eyes swept the scene, Clara on the ground, the cow, the calf, and his expression shifted through surprise to something else she couldn't quite read. "I saw buzzards circling," he said. "Thought something was wrong." Something was wrong, Clara gestured at the calf. She was stuck. I couldn't wait. Caleb crouched beside the cow, his hands moving over her with practiced efficiency, checking for tears or bleeding or any of the dozen complications that could still kill her. Then he examined the calf, lifting her to test her strength, checking her mouth and eyes. "Clean birth," he said finally. "No damage I can see." He looked at Clara. "You do this yourself?" "There wasn't anyone else." "That's not what I asked." "Yes, I did it myself." Caleb stood, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled. Not a polite gesture or a half smirk, but a real smile that changed his whole face. "Well, maybe you're not as hopeless as I thought." Clara wanted to be offended, but she was too exhausted and too relieved. High praise. "It is, actually." He offered her a hand up. When she took it, he pulled her to her feet and didn't let go right away. "You did good, Clara." It was the first time he'd used her given name. Something about it made her chest feel tight. "I was terrified," she admitted. "You should have been. Fear keeps you careful." He released her hand and stepped back. "But you did it anyway. That's what matters." The calf chose that moment to finally get her legs under her, standing in that precarious newborn way before staggering toward her mother. They both watched as she found what she was looking for and began to nurse. "She'll be strong," Caleb said. "Good bone structure. Might keep her for breeding." "I was going to sell the mother." "You were. Past tense." He looked at Clara. "A cow that survives a birth like that and doesn't reject her calf? That's a keeper. Besides," he gestured at the calf, "you worked too hard to bring her into the world just to sell her off." Clara looked at the pair, the cow licking her baby with rough affection, the calf nursing with single-minded focus. He was right. She'd fought for this life. It mattered now in a way the abstract idea of 15 head of cattle never had. "I need to clean up," she said, suddenly aware of how she must look. "You need to eat first. You're shaking." "I'm fine." "You're not, and I'm not arguing about it." Caleb headed for his horse and returned with a canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Drink, then eat, then clean up, in that order." The water was cold and tasted like metal and was the best thing Clara had ever drunk. The food was simple, bread, dried meat, cheese, but her hand shook so badly she almost dropped it. Caleb watched her with that quiet attention he had, not hovering but present. "First time I assisted a birth, I threw up afterward," he said. "You didn't." "Did, all over my father's boots. He made me clean them, then made me go right back out and help with the next one." Caleb sat down on a fence rail. "Said if I was going to ranch, I needed to get comfortable with being uncomfortable." Clara took another bite of bread. "Was he a good teacher?" "He was a hard man, but fair, mostly." Caleb's expression went distant. "He taught me everything about cattle and land and survival. Just forgot to teach me much about being happy while doing it." "Is that why you helped me? Trying to teach differently than he did?" Caleb considered this. "Maybe. Or maybe I just don't like seeing good land go to waste." He stood. "Come on, I'll help you get them settled in the near pasture where you can keep an eye on them. Then you're taking the rest of the day off." "I can't afford to." "You can't afford not to. You push too hard after something like this, you'll make a mistake that costs you." His tone left no room for argument. "Rest today. Tomorrow we start preparing for winter in earnest." They moved the cow and calf together, a slow process since the newborn could barely walk and had to rest every few yards. By the time they had them settled with food and water, the sun was well up and Clara felt like she could sleep for a week. Caleb lingered after the work was done, checking things that didn't need checking, adjusting fence wire that was already fine. Finally, he turned to her. "You planning to stay at the ranch now or keep going back to Widow Krantz's?" "Stay here. It's foolish to ride back and forth every day." "It is." He paused. "You got enough supplies? Firewood?" "I'll manage." "That's not an answer." Clara bristled, her exhaustion making her defensive. "I've managed everything else so far." "You have." Caleb met her eyes. "But you don't get points for making things harder than they need to be. I'll send my hand over with some extra wood tomorrow. You can pay me back later if it makes you feel better." "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's survival." He mounted his horse. "Winter up here isn't like Boston, Clara. It doesn't care about your pride. Take the help." He rode off before she could argue further, leaving her standing in the yard feeling simultaneously grateful and irritated. The combination was becoming familiar when it came to Caleb Boone. True to his word, a young man arrived the next afternoon with a wagon full of cut wood. He introduced himself as Danny, Caleb's ranch hand, and proceeded to stack the wood with efficient speed while making cheerful conversation about nothing in particular. When Clara tried to pay him, he shook his head. "Boss already paid me. You want to settle up with him? That's between you two." Danny grinned. "Though if you got any of Widow Krantz's biscuits lying around, I wouldn't say no." Clara gave him the last 3 from her saddlebag, and he left whistling. The days grew shorter and colder. Caleb came most mornings, sometimes with Danny, sometimes alone. The work shifted from repairs to preparation, cutting hay, stacking it in the barn, checking and rechecking that everything was sealed against wind and snow. Clara learned to swing an axe without hitting her own leg, to judge the weight of a hay bale, to read the sky for approaching storms. She also learned that ranching in autumn was a race against time. Every day mattered. Every task completed was one less thing that could kill you or your animals when the temperature dropped. The urgency of it drove her harder than any of Caleb's criticisms ever had. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the difficult birth, Clara rode into town for supplies. The mercantile was crowded, unusual for a weekday, and she gathered what she needed while half listening to the conversations around her. Selling out, heard it from Porter himself. "Can't say I blame him. Place barely turned a profit even in good years." Clara's attention sharpened. She moved closer to the 2 men talking, pretending to examine a display of tin cups. "Whose place?" she asked. The older man, someone she recognized but didn't know by name, turned. "Oh, Miss Whitmore. Talking about the Richardson Ranch, east of here. Bank's foreclosing. They got until spring to sell or they lose everything." "What happened?" "Same thing that always happens. Drought, debt, bad luck." He shrugged. "Richardson's got a wife and 3 kids. Can't keep throwing good money after bad." Clara paid for her supplies and left, but the conversation stayed with her. The Richardson Ranch. She'd heard Caleb mention it once, calling it good land poorly managed. And now a family was losing everything. She thought about it all the way back to her ranch, about how close she might be to the same fate without Caleb's help, about how many things had to go right just to survive out here, and how many ways everything could go wrong. That evening, Caleb stopped by to check on the new calf. He found Clara in the barn, pitching hay with more force than necessary. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Heard about the Richardsons." "Ah." Caleb leaned against a post. "Yeah, that's a damn shame. Could it happen to me?" He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. "You're in better shape than Richardson was. You don't have a family to feed and you've been keeping your costs down. But yeah, it could happen. This life doesn't come with guarantees." Clara stabbed the pitchfork into the hay. "Do you ever regret it, choosing this?" "Every winter." He said it matter-of-factly. "Every time a cow dies that shouldn't have. Every time the work feels endless and the profit doesn't justify it. Then spring comes, or a calf like yours makes it when it shouldn't, and I remember why I'm still here." "Why are you still here?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Because I'm good at it. Because the land matters, even when it's hard, and because—" He stopped himself. "Because what?" "Because I don't know how to be anything else." He pushed off from the post. "Come on, I'll help you finish up here. Then you're going to show me what you've been doing with those account books I told you to keep." The account books were a mess. Clara knew it, Caleb knew it, but he sat at her kitchen table and walked her through them anyway, showing her how to track expenses and income, how to project costs for winter, how to see the truth of her situation in numbers instead of hope. "You're not as bad off as you think," he said finally, "but you're not comfortable either. You need a good winter, no major losses, no big repairs, and you need to sell those calves at a fair price come spring. And if I don't get a good winter, then we figure it out." He closed the ledger. "But don't borrow trouble. Focus on what you can control." After he left, Clara sat at the table and looked at those numbers. She'd been so focused on learning the physical work that she'd barely thought about the business side. But ranching was both, and she needed to be competent at both to survive. She was still sitting there when she heard a knock. Caleb was back, his hat in his hands. "Forgot to mention," he said, "there's a dance in town Saturday. Harvest celebration such as it is. You should come." Clara blinked. "A dance? People get together, there's music, food. It's not Boston, but it's something." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Whole town will be there. Good chance to—" He stopped. "Just thought you might want to come." "Are you asking me to go with you?" I'm telling you there's a dance and you should go. But color had risen in his face. If you want to ride into town, I'll be passing by around 6. He left before she could answer, and Clara sat there trying to figure out what had just happened. Caleb Boone, who barely spoke 3 unnecessary words in a row, had just invited her to a dance. Maybe. Possibly. She wasn't entirely sure. Saturday came, and Clara spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to figure out what to wear. Her Boston dresses were too fine, too impractical. But her work clothes were exactly that. Work clothes, stained and worn and smelling of barn no matter how many times she washed them. She settled on the least ruined of her traveling dresses, fixed her hair as best she could without a proper mirror, and was waiting on the porch when Caleb arrived in a wagon instead of on horseback. He'd cleaned up too. Not fancy, but he'd shaved and changed into a shirt she hadn't seen before, and his hair was damp, like he'd dunked his head in a basin. He helped her into the wagon without comment, and they rode toward town in silence. "You don't have to do this," Clara said finally. "If you'd rather not." "I asked, didn't I?" "You told me about a dance. That's not quite the same thing." Caleb glanced at her. "Clara, I'm not good at this. Talking around things. Pretty words. So I'll just say it plain. I'd like you to come to the dance. With me, if you want." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "I want to." "Good." He focused back on the road, but she caught the edge of a smile. "Fair warning, I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I." "Then we'll figure it out together." The dance was held in the largest barn in Red Hollow, which belonged to a family named the Thompsons. Lanterns hung from the rafters, and someone had swept the floor clean. A trio of musicians, fiddle, guitar, and a man with a harmonica, played in the corner while people milled around tables laden with food. Clara felt every eye turn toward them when they arrived. The whispers started immediately, not even bothering to be subtle. Caleb's hand settled at the small of her back, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "I'm used to being talked about." "Doesn't mean you should have to be." Widow Krantz appeared, looking surprisingly festive in a dress that wasn't black. "About time you two showed up. Clara, come help me set out these pies before the men demolish the table." Clara let herself be pulled away, but she was aware of Caleb's eyes following her across the room. She helped arrange food while Widow Krantz kept up a steady stream of commentary about who was dancing with whom and which of the younger folk were making fools of themselves. "Caleb Boone hasn't brought a woman to one of these in 5 years, Widow Krantz said, not quite casually. Clara nearly dropped the pie she was holding. "He hasn't?" "Not since Sarah Michaels moved to Denver, and that was barely worth calling courting from what I saw." The widow gave her a sharp look. "He's a good man, hard but good. Doesn't give his time lightly." Before Clara could respond to that, Margaret Collins appeared with her usual directness. "Are you two together, or is he just teaching you to ranch?" Clara had no idea how to answer that. "Both? Good. You could do worse." Margaret grabbed a glass of punch. "Much worse. Half the men in this town would have let you fail just to buy your land cheap." "That's mercenary. That's business. Caleb helped you anyway." Margaret raised her glass. "Says something about his character." The music shifted to something faster, and people began to fill the makeshift dance floor. Clara watched them, remembering formal balls in Boston where every step was choreographed and every dance had rules. This was nothing like that. People moved with enthusiasm rather than precision, laughing when they stumbled, not caring about perfect form. Caleb materialized at her elbow. "Dance with me." Clara took his offered hand and let him lead her onto the floor. He'd been right. He wasn't much of a dancer. But he was solid and steady, and when Clara stepped on his feet twice in the first minute, he just adjusted and kept going. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be. I've been stepped on worse by horses." She laughed, and something in his expression softened. They moved through the dance, finding a rhythm that worked even if it wasn't elegant. Around them, other couples spun and swayed, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, Clara felt like maybe she belonged to something larger than just her own desperate survival. The song ended and another began. Caleb didn't let go of her hand. "Again?" he asked. "Again." They danced 3 more songs before taking a break. Clara was flushed and breathing hard, her feet aching in ways that had nothing to do with ranch work. Caleb brought her punch and they stood at the edge of the room, watching the crowd. Thank you, Clara said, for bringing me. Thank you for coming. A man Clara vaguely recognized approached, someone from one of the neighboring ranches. Caleb, Miss Whitmore. Heard you had some success with that difficult birth. News travels, Caleb said neutrally. It does, especially when it's unusual. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. City woman learning to ranch makes for good conversation. Clara felt Caleb tense beside her. Is there something you wanted to say, Morrison? Morrison held up his hands. Just making conversation, though I do wonder how long before Miss Whitmore decides this life's too hard and sells out. Be interested in that land myself, if the price is right. The land's not for sale, Clara said. Not now, maybe, but winter's coming. Things can change quick. Morrison tipped his hat. Just want you to know there are options, if you need them. He walked away, and Clara felt anger rise hot in her chest. He's betting I'll fail. He is. And he's not the only one. Caleb's jaw was tight. There's always vultures circling, waiting for someone to go under so they can pick up the pieces cheap. I won't give him the satisfaction. I know you won't. Caleb looked at her, and something fierce burned in his eyes. You're too stubborn to quit now. The dance continued around them, but Clara was suddenly very aware of how close they were standing, how his hand was still holding hers, how the noise and the people seemed to fade into background. Caleb must have felt it too, because his thumb traced a small circle on her palm, a gesture so small and intimate it made her breath catch. Clara, he started, then stopped as someone called his name. Danny was pushing through the crowd, his young face worried. Boss, we got a problem. Storm coming in, and I mean a bad one. Sky's already changing. Caleb looked toward the door, and Clara could see it now too, the way the temperature had dropped, how the wind had picked up enough to rattle the barn walls. We need to go, Caleb said. Now, before it hits. The musicians had stopped playing. People were gathering their things, the festive atmosphere evaporating into urgent preparation. This wasn't Clara's first storm warning since arriving in Montana, but something about the way everyone moved, quick, efficient, no panic but no casual movement either, told her this was different. How bad? She asked Caleb. Bad enough that you're not going back to your ranch tonight. You'll stay at mine. I need to check on my cattle. Danny already brought them in close to the buildings this afternoon. I had him do it before we left. Caleb was already moving toward the door. They'll be fine. You won't be if you try to ride out in what's coming. Clara wanted to argue, but the first snowflakes were already falling, thick and fast. Within minutes, the world beyond the barn door had turned white. Caleb's ranch was closer, only 2 miles, but those 2 miles took twice as long as they should have. The wind picked up until it screamed, driving snow horizontally into their faces. Clara had never experienced anything like it. The cold cut through her dress like it wasn't there, and she lost feeling in her fingers even clutched against Caleb's back on the horse he'd switched to when the wagon became useless. When they finally reached the ranch house, Caleb practically carried her inside. The warmth hit like a wall, and Clara stood shivering while he built up the fire and brought blankets. Get those wet things off, he said, not looking at her. I'll make coffee. Clara's hands shook too badly to work the buttons. Caleb noticed, swore under his breath, and helped her with brisk efficiency that was somehow both intimate and entirely practical. He wrapped her in a quilt and sat her by the fire, then disappeared into what she assumed was his bedroom. He returned with dry clothes, a shirt of his that hung to her knees, wool socks that went up to her thighs. Not proper, but warm. Change while I see to the horses. By the time he came back in, stamping snow from his boots, Claire had changed and was holding a cup of coffee with both hands, trying to get feeling back into her fingers. Caleb had snow in his hair and his shoulders, and his face was red from the cold. It's bad out there, he said. Going to be a long night. They sat by the fire while the storm raged outside, the wind howling like something alive. Caleb's house was similar to hers but better maintained. Solid walls, tight seals on the windows, a fireplace that actually drew properly. The main room held a table, chairs, a shelf of books that surprised her, and little else. Functional, spare, like the man himself. You read, Clara said, gesturing at the books. Not much else to do in winter. He poured himself coffee. You can borrow them if you want. Beats staring at walls for 3 months. 3 months? Give or take. Winter up here, lass. He settled into the other chair. You'll want to stock up on reading material along with everything else. They fell into silence, but it was comfortable. Outside, the storm battered the house, but inside they were warm and safe. Clara found herself studying Caleb in the firelight, the way his shoulders relaxed now that the immediate work was done, the lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than she'd seen, the hands that were scarred and capable and had held hers while they danced. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her looking. "That I don't really know anything about you, except how to fix a fence and birth a calf." "Not much else to know." "I doubt that." Caleb considered her over his coffee cup. "What do you want to know?" "Why ranching? You could have done anything." "Not really. My father had land, I inherited it. Simple as that." He paused. "I tried leaving once. Went to Denver, thought maybe I'd find something else. Lasted 3 months before I came back. Turned out I didn't fit anywhere else." "Do you fit here?" "I do. This land makes sense to me. The rules are simple. Work hard, prepare for the worst, take care of what's yours. I'm good at those things." "And the things you're not good at?" His eyes met hers. "People. Saying the right thing. Being anything other than what I am. I don't think you're as bad at those as you think. You're too generous." "I'm honest." Clara set down her cup. "You've helped me every day for 2 months. You didn't have to. You certainly weren't obligated to. Henry was a good man. This isn't about Henry." She held his gaze. "Why did you really help me, Caleb?" He was quiet for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I looked at you that first day, standing in the street covered in dust and looking so damn determined, and I thought, she doesn't belong here. But then I thought, she doesn't know that yet. And I wanted—" He stopped. "I wanted to see if I was wrong, if maybe you could make it. And you proved me wrong. You worked harder than anyone I've ever taught, never complained, even when I was harder on you than I needed to be. You figured things out." He leaned forward. "That birth, Clara. Most people with years of experience would have run for help. You stayed. You did what needed doing. That took courage." "I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing it anyway." He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. "You're going to make it. I believe that now." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Because I'm a good student? Because you're stronger than you know." His thumb traced her knuckles. "And because you make me want things I thought I'd given up on." "What things?" Instead of answering, Caleb stood, still holding her hand, and pulled her to her feet. They stood close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. She could see the war in his expression, want and caution, hope and the fear of hoping. "I'm not good with words," he said quietly, "but I need you to know this isn't just about teaching you to ranch anymore. Hasn't been for a while." "I know," Clara whispered. "You should probably tell me to back off. Find a proper man who knows how to court a woman right." "I've had proper men. They didn't stay when things got hard. I'm not going anywhere." "I know that too." Caleb made a sound low in his throat and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or practiced, but it was real, honest and hungry, and exactly what Clara needed. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, feeling like something inside her that had been wound tight for months was finally releasing. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since you stepped on my feet dancing." Clara laughed, breathless. "Just then? Maybe before." He pulled back to look at her. "Clara, I need to say this clear. I'm not an easy man. I'm set in my ways, I work too much, and I'm not going to change who I am. I don't want you to change. But if you're willing to try this, try us, I'll do my best by you. I'll teach you everything I know, I'll help you make your ranch work, and I'll—" He stopped, struggling. "I'll try to be what you need." "You already are." Clara reached up to touch his face, feeling the rasp of stubble under her palm. "I'm not looking for perfect, Caleb. I'm looking for real. And this is the most real thing I've found since leaving Boston." He kissed her again, softer this time, and Clara felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't even known was unsettled. When they finally separated, the storm was still raging outside, but it felt distant, unimportant. "You'll take the bedroom," Caleb said. "I'll sleep out here." "Caleb?" Not negotiating that. You need proper rest, and we're doing this right. He squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. Go on. Morning's going to come early, and we'll have work to do digging out. Clara wanted to argue, but the exhaustion from the day was catching up with her. She went to the bedroom, spare and neat like everything else about him, and climbed into bed still wearing his shirt. The sheet smelled like him, like wood smoke and soap and something uniquely Caleb. She fell asleep listening to the storm and the small sounds of him settling in the main room, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt something that might have been peace. Morning came gray and cold, the storm having blown itself out sometime before dawn. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, now dry from hanging near the fire, and emerged from the bedroom to find Caleb already cooking breakfast. Storm dropped 2 feet, he said without preamble. We'll need to check both places, make sure nothing collapsed under the weight. Clara accepted the coffee he handed her, their fingers brushing in a way that made her remember last night's kiss with startling clarity. From the way Caleb's jaw tightened, he remembered it too. Your place first, he continued. Closer, and you'll worry if we don't. They rode out through snow that came up to the horses' chests in places. The world had transformed overnight into something white and silent and beautiful, in a way that would have taken Clara's breath if she hadn't been so worried about what they'd find. The sky was clearing, pale blue showing through breaks in the clouds, and the sun on the snow was almost blinding. Her ranch, when they reached it, looked like something from a winter painting. Snow covered the roof, the fences, everything. But the building stood solid, and when Clara counted the cattle huddled near the barn, all 15 were accounted for. They're fine, Caleb said, reading her relief. You built those shelters solid. They weathered it. They spent the morning clearing paths, checking for damage, making sure the animals had access to food and water. The work was hard and cold, and Clara's fingers went numb inside her gloves. But there was satisfaction in it too, in seeing that what she'd built had held. It was near noon when they found the problem. One of the fence posts on the eastern boundary had cracked under the weight of snow and ice, and a section of wire had come down. It wasn't catastrophic, but it needed fixing before the cattle wandered off or predators found the gap. I can handle it, Clara said. Caleb looked at her. You sure? You've taught me how, and you need to check your own place. He hesitated, and she could see the war between practical necessity and the desire to help. Finally, he nodded. Fix it right. Don't rush just to get it done. I won't. And if you run into trouble, I'll come find you. Clara touched his arm. Go. I'll be fine. He rode off, looking back twice before disappearing over the ridge. Clara watched him go, then turned to the broken fence with grim determination. It took her 3 hours. The ground was frozen, making the post hole brutal work, and her hands were clumsy with cold. Twice she had to stop and warm her fingers by a small fire she built, and once she nearly hit herself with the post driver. But she got it done. The post set deep and straight, the wire strung tight and secure. She was packing up her tools when she heard hoofbeats. Not Caleb returning. The rhythm was wrong, and there were too many horses. Clara straightened, her hand going instinctively to the rifle she'd started carrying everywhere, to find 3 riders approaching. Morrison was in front, the man from the dance. The 2 with him she didn't recognize, but they had the look of hired help, rough men who did whatever they were paid to do. Miss Whitmore, Morrison said, reining in a few yards away. Surprised to find you out here alone. I'm working my land. Clara kept her voice level. What do you want? Just being neighborly, checking that you weathered the storm all right. His eyes swept the fence, the fresh post. Doing your own repairs, I see. Caleb Boone not helping anymore? He has his own ranch to run. That he does. Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. Must be hard managing all this alone. Woman by herself, no experience, winter coming on. Makes a person wonder how long you can keep it up. Clara's grip tightened on the rifle. I'm managing fine. For now. Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. But one bad storm, one sick cow, one accident when there's no help around, things can go wrong fast out here, especially for someone who doesn't really know what they're doing. One of the men with him laughed, a mean sound. I know what I'm doing well enough, Clara said. Do you? Morrison gestured at the ranch. This place broke your uncle, and he'd been working land his whole life. What makes you think you'll do better? Because I have to. That's not an answer. That's desperation. Morrison straightened in his saddle. I'm prepared to make you a fair offer, Miss Whitmore. $300 for the land and remaining cattle. That's generous, considering the state of things. It's not for sale. 400 then. Final offer. You could take that money, go back east, start over somewhere easier. I said no. Morrison's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. This land will break you just like it broke Henry. Better to sell now while you can still walk away with something. Better for who? You? Clara raised the rifle slightly, not quite pointing it, but making her position clear. I think you should leave now. For a moment, the air went tense. Morrison's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their own weapons. Clara's heart hammered, but she held her ground, remembering every lesson Caleb had taught her about showing weakness. Morrison held up a hand, stopping his men. No need for dramatics. We're just talking business. He gathered his reins. But think about what I said. Winter's long, and a lot can happen. Offer stands until spring. They rode off, and Clara didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared from sight. Then she sat down hard on the frozen ground, her whole body shaking with reaction. She was still sitting there when Caleb returned an hour later. He took one look at her face and dismounted fast. What happened? Clara told him, watching his expression go dark with anger. He threatened you, Caleb said flatly. He made an offer, a bad one. He came onto your land with 2 men and tried to intimidate you into selling. That's a threat. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. I'm going to have words with Morrison. Don't. Clara stood, brushing snow from her pants. It won't help. Men like that, confrontation just makes them dig in harder. So what, you just let him try to scare you? I let him try and fail. Clara met his eyes. I'm not selling, Caleb. Not to Morrison, not to anyone. And I'm not running scared because some vulture thinks I'm easy prey. Caleb studied her, and something in his expression shifted. You pointed a rifle at him. I did. You ready to use it if you have to? Clara thought about that. I hope I never have to find out, but I won't be pushed off my own land. Caleb stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. You're something else, you know that? Stubborn, you mean. Brave. He kissed her, hard and quick. But Morrison's right about one thing. You shouldn't be out here alone. Not until we know what he's planning. I can't afford to hire help. You're not hiring. You're accepting help from someone who cares what happens to you. Before she could argue, he continued, Danny can stay in your barn loft for a while. He's young, but he's capable, and he won't let anyone push you around. Caleb, not negotiating this. Danny stays, or you move to my ranch until spring. Your choice. Clara wanted to fight him on it, but the memory of Morrison's men and their casual menace was too fresh. Danny can stay, but I'm paying him. Fine. Work it out with him. Caleb released her and stepped back. Now show me this fence you fixed. He inspected her work with his usual critical eye, testing the post, checking the wire tension. Finally, he nodded. Solid. You did good. Coming from Caleb, it felt like high praise. Danny moved into the barn loft that evening, cheerful about the arrangement despite the cramped quarters and the cold. Better than bunkhouse at the boss's place, he said. Got my own space here, and Miss Clara is a better cook than anyone at our ranch. I'm not cooking for you, Clara said. Not asking you to, just saying if you happen to make extra, I wouldn't complain. He grinned, all youthful optimism. Don't worry, ma'am. Anyone comes around looking for trouble, they'll have to go through me first. Clara hoped it wouldn't come to that. The days settled into a new rhythm. Clara worked her land with Danny's help, learning to delegate tasks and trust someone else to do them right. Caleb still came most mornings, though now his visits had a different quality. Less teacher and student, more something Clara didn't have words for yet. They stole moments when they could. A kiss in the barn when Danny was out checking fence. Caleb's hand finding hers across the kitchen table. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. It was Margaret who finally confronted her about it. Clara had ridden into town for supplies, and the schoolteacher cornered her at the mercantile. You and Caleb Boone, Margaret said without preamble. That serious or just convenience? Clara felt heat rise in her face. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Whole town's talking about how his horse is at your place more than his own ranch. Margaret's expression softened. I'm not judging, just asking as a friend. Do you know what you're doing? No, Clara admitted. But
I know I care about him, and he cares about me. Beyond that, she shrugged helplessly. I'm figuring it out as I go. Fair enough? Margaret picked up a bag of flour. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. Caleb's been alone too long, gotten too set in his ways. You shake things up. Is that good?
It's necessary. Stagnant water breeds disease. Same goes for people. Margaret paid for her supplies. Just be careful. Morrison's got friends, and not all of them play fair. The warning proved prophetic. 2 weeks later, Clara woke to find one of her cattle dead in the pasture. Not sick, not injured by accident. Shot. A clean kill from distance, the kind someone made who knew what they were doing. Danny found her standing over the carcass, her face white with rage.
This was deliberate, she said. Yes, ma'am. Danny's usual cheerfulness was gone. Want me to ride for the sheriff? No, I want you to help me butcher what we can save before it spoils, and then I want you to help me find who did this. They worked fast, salvaging meat that Clara took to Widow Krantz to smoke and store. Then Clara rode to Caleb's ranch, Danny trailing behind. Caleb took one look at her face and knew. What happened?
She told him, watched his expression go cold and hard in a way she'd never seen. Morrison, he said. You don't know that. Who else? He warned you, didn't he? Said a lot could happen during winter. Caleb was already saddling his horse. I'm going to the sheriff. Porter won't do anything without proof. Then I'll get proof. How? By beating it out of Morrison? Clara grabbed his arm. That's what he wants. You lose your temper, do something stupid. Suddenly you're the problem instead of him. Caleb pulled free. So what, we just let him kill your cattle one by one until you can't afford to keep going? No, we document it, we stay alert, and we make sure it doesn't happen again. Clara's voice was steady, despite the fury burning in her chest. And we don't give him the satisfaction of seeing me scared. Clara.
I mean it, Caleb. Getting yourself arrested or killed won't help me. Being smart will. They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Caleb looked away, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. Fine. We do it your way. But Danny's not enough protection anymore. I'm moving to your place until this is settled. Clara wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too angry and too scared beneath the bravado. All right. And you don't go anywhere alone. Not to check fence, not to town, nowhere. Someone's always with you. That's not negotiating. Caleb's voice was flat. Morrison's made his move. Now we play defense until we figure out his next one. That night, Caleb brought his things to Clara's ranch. Not much. A bedroll, spare clothes, his rifle. He set up in the main room, insisting Clara keep the bedroom, but the arrangement felt both too intimate and not intimate enough. They ate dinner in awkward silence, Danny chattering to fill the gaps, until the young man finally made his excuses and retreated to the loft. This is strange, Clara said finally. It is. You don't have to stay, you know. I'm not some delicate flower who needs constant protection. Caleb looked at her across the table. I know you're not. That's not why I'm staying. Then why? Because the thought of someone hurting you makes me want to tear things apart with my bare hands. He said it quietly, like a confession. And because I sleep better knowing you're safe. Clara's throat went tight. Caleb, I'm not good at this, he interrupted, at saying what I feel, but I need you to know. It's not just about teaching you to ranch anymore. It's not about Henry or obligation or any of that. It's about you. About wanting you safe and happy and here. Clara stood and moved around the table. Caleb rose to meet her, and she walked into his arms like it was the most natural thing in the world. I know, she said against his chest. I feel it too. This thing between us, I don't have words for it either. But it's real. He held her tight, his chin resting on top of her head. We should probably talk about what that means. Probably. Clara pulled back enough to look at him. But can it wait until we've dealt with Morrison and Winter and everything else trying to kill me? Fair point. Caleb's hand came up to cup her face. But after, we're having that conversation. After, Clara agreed and kissed him. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped up in each other, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. Then Caleb stepped back, his expression reluctant. You should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard. It was. And the day after. And the week after that.
Winter settled in with brutal efficiency. The temperature dropped until Clara's breath froze in the air, until water left out overnight turned to solid ice, until the cattle huddled together for warmth and had to be fed twice a day just to maintain their weight. Clara learned what real cold felt like. Not Boston winter, where you could retreat indoors and wait it out. This was cold that demanded constant vigilance, constant work, constant awareness that any mistake could be fatal. Fingers left exposed too long went numb and stayed that way. Animals that didn't have proper shelter died. Pipes froze and burst if you weren't careful. But she also learned she could survive it, that she was stronger than she'd known, that the body could adapt to almost anything if pushed hard enough and given no choice. Caleb was there through all of it, teaching her the winter rhythms of ranch life. How to break ice on water troughs. How to tell when a cow was getting too thin. How to conserve energy and resources when both were scarce. He pushed her hard, but never past what she could handle, and she grew to trust his judgment of her limits better than her own. Danny proved his worth too, cheerful even in miserable conditions, always willing to do the dirty jobs without complaint. Between the three of them, they kept the ranch running. No more cattle died mysteriously, but the threat hung over them like storm clouds. Morrison's offer came again, this time in a letter delivered by a rider who wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. $450. Final offer. Good. Until the spring thaw. Clara burned the letter in the stove and didn't bother with a reply. January brought the coldest temperatures yet. Clara woke one morning to find frost on the inside of the windows. The world outside so white and still, it looked like a painting. She dressed in layers, wool shirt, vest, coat, scarf, gloves, and still felt the cold bite through. Caleb was already up, feeding the stove. Temperature dropped below zero last night. We need to check the cattle early. They went out together, Danny staying behind to keep the fires going. The cold was stunning, a physical force that stole breath and made exposed skin burn. Clara's eyelashes froze. Her scarf went stiff with ice from her breathing. The cattle were mostly fine, huddled in the shelter Clara and Caleb had built in November. But one was down, a young steer, not moving. "Damn," Caleb said, kneeling beside it. He checked for signs of life, his movements efficient even through thick gloves. "He's gone." Froze during the night. Clara stared at the dead animal, feeling the loss like a punch to the gut. That was money. That was meat. That was survival slipping away one frozen carcass at a time. "We'll butcher what we can," Caleb said, reading her expression. Loss hurts, but waste hurts worse. They worked in the bitter cold, their hands going numb even with breaks to warm them. It was brutal work made worse by the temperature, but they got it done. By the time they finished, Clara couldn't feel her feet and her face hurt from the cold. Back in the house, she stood by the stove, shaking, trying to thaw out. Caleb brought her coffee and made her drink it, then checked her fingers and toes for frostbite. "You're fine," he said. "Just cold. Nothing permanent." "How do you stand it?" Clara asked. "The losses, the constant fight, all of it?" "You get used to it. The losses sting less after a while." He pulled off his gloves and flexed his own fingers. "And you learn to measure success different. It's not about having zero losses. It's about losing less than you would have without the work." That's a grim way to look at it. It's realistic. Caleb sat beside her. "You've lost one to shooting, one to cold, out of 15 head over 3 months of winter. That's not bad, Clara. That's actually pretty good for a first year." She knew he was right, but it didn't make the losses hurt less. That night, lying in bed and listening to Caleb moving around in the main room, Clara thought about what she'd survived so far. The scandal in Boston that had destroyed her old life. The journey west. The gunfight her first day in Red Hollow. Learning to ranch from scratch. Morrison's threats. The brutal winter. She thought about this woman she'd been 6 months ago, proper, sheltered, convinced her worth lay in reputation and propriety. That woman wouldn't recognize who Clara had become. Rougher, harder, capable in ways she'd never imagined needing to be. Better, in ways that mattered. The door to the bedroom opened, and Caleb stood silhouetted in the dim light from the main room. "Can't sleep," he said. "Me neither." He hesitated, then crossed to sit on the edge of her bed. In the darkness, his face was all shadows and angles. "I've been thinking." "About?" "About us. About what we're doing." His hand found hers under the blanket. "About what comes after winter." Clara's heart started beating faster. "What about it?" "I want you to know Whatever happens with Morrison, with the ranch, with any of it, I'm not going anywhere. This thing between us, it's not temporary for me. It's not just convenience or winter loneliness or any of that. I know. Do you? Caleb's grip tightened. Because I need to say it plain, Clara. I love you. I'm not good at pretty words or romance, but that's the truth. I love you, and I want a future with you, whatever that looks like. Clara sat up, her free hand reaching for his face. I love you too. I think I have for a while, I just didn't know how to say it. Caleb made a sound that was half laugh, half relief. Then he was kissing her, deep and desperate, and Clara kissed him back with everything she had. His hands tangled in her hair, hers fisted in his shirt, and for a long moment the world narrowed to just this, just them, just the truth of what they felt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Stay here, Clara whispered. Tonight, I don't want to be alone. You sure? I'm sure. He kicked off his boots and climbed under the blankets beside her, still fully dressed. Clara curled into his side, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong. His arm came around her, holding her close. This proper enough? He asked. Nothing about us is proper, but it's right. Clara closed her eyes. That's all that matters. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, while outside the wind howled and the temperature dropped and the long Montana winter wore on. February came, and with it a brief thaw that fooled everyone into thinking spring might actually arrive. The temperature climbed to barely above freezing, and snow began to melt in patches. Clara took advantage to ride to town for supplies, Danny accompanying her despite her protests that she'd be fine alone. Boss would have my hide if I let you go by yourself, Danny said cheerfully. Besides, I need to pick up some things from the mercantile anyway. Red Hollow looked different under thaw conditions. Muddy, messy, the streets churned to muck by horses and wagons. Clara tied Bess outside the mercantile and went in, Danny following. Morrison was there. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. They hadn't seen each other since the day he'd made his offer at her ranch, though Clara knew he'd sent the letter. She'd half expected another confrontation, but he just nodded politely and went back to his business. Clara did her shopping quickly, aware of his presence like an itch between her shoulder blades. She was paying when he approached. Miss Whitmore, surviving the winter, I see. I am. Lost any more cattle? The question was casual, but the implication wasn't. Clara met his eyes. 1. To the cold. Natural causes. Natural causes, of course. Morrison smiled, thin and cold. Still, that's 2 head gone. Hard losses for a small herd. I'm managing, for now. He tipped his hat. Spring will tell the real story, won't it? Whether you've got enough left to make a go of it. He left before Clara could respond, but his words stayed with her all the way home. That night, she went over her accounts with brutal honesty. 2 cattle loss meant less profit when she sold in the spring. She'd spent more on feed than anticipated, and her supplies were running lower than they should be. If she had to buy her way through another month of winter, the numbers got tight. Not impossible, but tight enough to keep her awake at night. Caleb found her hunched over the ledger, worrying at the figures like they might change if she looked hard enough. Morrison get in your head? He asked. He's not wrong. I'm barely scraping by. Most people barely scrape by their first year, hell, their first 5 years. Caleb sat across from her. You're doing better than Henry ever did, and you've only been at it for half a year. That's not saying much. Henry died broke. Henry died old and tired and broken down by life. You're none of those things. Caleb reached across to close the ledger. Stop torturing yourself with numbers. You'll make it work or you won't, and staring at that book won't change which. That's not comforting. It's honest. He pulled her to her feet. Come on. You need to eat and sleep, not sit here inventing problems that don't exist yet. Clara let herself be led, too tired to argue. But that night, curled against Caleb's side, she couldn't shake the worry. What if Morrison was right? What if she'd fought this hard only to fail anyway? The thaw lasted 3 days before winter returned with renewed fury. A blizzard swept in overnight, howling like something alive, dumping snow faster than they could clear it. Clara woke to find herself trapped, the door blocked by drifts that came up to the window. We're not going anywhere today, Caleb said, peering out at the white wall beyond the glass. Danny made it from the barn to the house only by following a rope they'd strung for exactly this purpose. He arrived covered head to toe in snow, stamping and shaking like a dog. Cattle are fine, he reported. Barn's holding, but that wind's something fierce. They spent the day trapped inside while the storm raged. Clara cooked, trying to make their supplies stretch. Caleb maintained the stove and checked the chimney every hour to make sure it wasn't getting blocked. Danny entertained them with stories from his childhood, tall tales that were probably half lies but made them laugh anyway. By the second day, cabin fever was setting in. By the third, they were all snapping at each other over nothing. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving behind drifts so deep Clara could have walked onto her roof from them. They spent 2 days just digging out, clearing paths, checking damage. The barn roof had partially collapsed under the weight of snow. Not catastrophic, but it needed repair before the next storm hit. They worked in brutal cold, Clara and Caleb on the roof, while Danny hauled supplies. Clara was hammering a support beam when her foot slipped on ice. She went down hard, sliding toward the edge, scrambling for purchase. Caleb grabbed her coat, his other hand locked around a rafter, holding them both as Clara's legs dangled over empty air. "I've got you," he said through gritted teeth. "Don't panic." Clara wasn't panicking. She was too terrified to panic. She clawed her way back up, Caleb hauling her with strength born of desperation, until she was back on solid roof and shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "You all right?" Caleb demanded, his hands on her face, checking for injury. "Fine. I'm fine," Clara's voice came out thin. "Just slipped." "You almost died." "But I didn't." Caleb pulled her against him, his heart hammering against her ear. "We're done for today. Roof can wait." They climbed down in silence. Danny took one look at their faces and didn't ask questions, just handed them both coffee and made himself scarce. Inside the house, Caleb paced like a caged animal. Clara watched him, still coming down from the adrenaline spike, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "I can't do this," Caleb said finally. Clara's stomach dropped. "Can't do what?" "Can't watch you almost die and pretend I'm fine with it." He stopped pacing to look at her. "Can't keep living in two places, pretending this is temporary, dancing around what we both know we want." "What do we want?" "Each other, a life together. This—" He gestured at the house, at everything, permanently. Clara set down her coffee. "Are you asking me something?" "I'm asking you to marry me." The words came out rough, unpolished. "I'm asking you to combine our ranches, build something that'll last. I'm asking you to be my wife and my partner, and let me spend the rest of my life making sure you don't fall off any more roofs." Clara crossed to him, her heart so full it hurt. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." "Probably, but it's honest." "It is." She reached up to kiss him. "And yes, my answer is yes." Caleb kissed her back like he was drowning and she was air, his hands cradling her face with a gentleness that contrasted with the desperation in his mouth. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. "We'll do it right," he said. "Get married proper, in town. Combine the herds, work both properties. It'll be hard, but we'll be stronger together." "We're already stronger together. Then we'll be unstoppable." Caleb pulled her close again. "Spring's coming. We'll make it through this winter, and then we'll build something Morrison and men like him can't touch." Clara believed him. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she believed in a future that extended beyond just survival. A future built on hard work and harder land, but built together with a man who loved her for exactly who she was. Outside, the wind still howled. Winter wasn't done with them yet, but inside, wrapped in Caleb's arms, Clara felt warm enough to face whatever came next. They told Danny first the next morning over breakfast. The young man looked between them, a grin spreading across his face. "About time," he said. "Was wondering when you two would stop dancing around it." "We weren't dancing," Caleb said. "Boss, you've been sleeping on her floor for 2 months. That's dancing." Danny raised his coffee cup. "Congratulations. When's the wedding?" "Spring," Clara said. "After the thaw, when we can actually get to town without risking our necks. And after we see what we've got left to work with," Caleb added, practical as always. "No point planning a future until we know we've survived the present." But the decision changed something between them. There was a certainty now, a foundation that went deeper than the daily work or even the love they'd confessed. They were building towards something permanent, and that made every hardship feel more bearable. The rest of February dragged on, cold and relentless. March arrived with false promises of warmth that never quite materialized. But the days were getting longer, and the snow, while still deep, had stopped falling with quite the same fury. Clara took inventory one morning in early March, counting her remaining cattle. 13 head, down from 15. Not terrible, but every loss stung. She ran the numbers in her head. What she could expect to get at sale, what she owed, what she'd need to keep operating. It was tight, tighter than she'd like, but possible. Caleb found her in the pasture, her breath steaming in the cold air. "Counting again?" he asked.
Always counting. Clara turned to face him.
13 head. If I can get them to sale in good condition, and if the price holds, I might clear my debts with enough left to buy supplies for next year. Might? Probably, maybe. I won't know until the sale. She pulled her coat tighter. What about you?
I'm in better shape. 42 head, all healthy. Should turn a decent profit. Caleb moved closer. But once we're married, it's not your herd and mine anymore. It's ours. We pool everything, work both properties, build something bigger than either of us could alone. You sure about that? You've worked your whole life building what you have. I'm bringing debt and barely a dozen cattle. You're bringing yourself. That's worth more than 100 head of cattle. He took her gloved hands in his. We're partners, Clara. Equal partners. Don't forget that. She kissed him, cold lips against cold lips, and felt the warmth anyway. That afternoon they rode to town together to spread the word. Widow Krantz heard the news first, her sharp eyes missing nothing when they walked into the boarding house together. Well, she said, took you long enough. We wanted to wait until we were sure we'd both survive winter, Clara said. Sensible. Half the couples out here don't make it past their first hard season. The widow's expression softened slightly. But you two seem solid enough. When's the ceremony? April, if the weather breaks. Simple ceremony, nothing fancy. I'll spread the word. Town'll want to come. Make a day of it. Widow Krantz actually smiled. It's been a long winter. People need something to celebrate. Margaret was next, catching them at the mercantile. She grabbed Clara's hands and squeezed. Finally, she said, I've been watching you two circle each other for months. About time you made it official. You knew? Clara asked. Everyone knew. Well, everyone except maybe you two. Margaret laughed. When's the wedding? April. I'll help organize. We'll need food, music, somewhere to hold it. Nothing big, Caleb interrupted. Just simple. It'll be simple, Margaret assured him, but it'll also be proper. This town's going to do right by you both. Sheriff Porter offered his congratulations with typical gruffness. Good match. You've both got spine. Need that out here. He paused. Morrison know yet? The question brought Clara up short. No, why would he? Because he's been sniffing around your property for months, and now you're about to make it a lot harder for him to push you out. Porter's expression was serious. Watch yourselves. Men like Morrison don't take well to losing what they think should be theirs. Let him try something, Caleb said, his voice hard. Don't go looking for trouble, Porter warned, but don't be stupid either. Keep your eyes open. They left town as the sun was setting, the sky painted orange and purple. Clara felt lighter than she had in months, the future suddenly seeming less like a struggle to survive and more like something worth building toward. Happy? Caleb asked. Yes. Clara leaned against him in the saddle. Scared, but happy. What are you scared of? That I'll wake up and this will all be a dream. That I'll be back in Boston and none of this will have been real. It's real. Caleb's arm tightened around her waist. And you're not going anywhere. They made it back to the ranch just as full dark fell. Danny had already fed the stock and started a fire, bless him. Clara cooked a simple dinner while Caleb checked the barn one more time, and they ate in comfortable silence. Later, lying in bed with Caleb beside her, they'd stopped pretending he was sleeping in the main room weeks ago. Clara stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had changed in the last 8 months. The woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and out of place, felt like someone else entirely. You thinking too loud, Caleb murmured. I can hear it from here. Just reflecting. On what? On how nothing turned out like I expected. Clara rolled to face him. When I came here, I thought I was running away, escaping something I couldn't fix.
But I wasn't running from anything. I was running toward this, toward you. I just didn't know it yet. Caleb's hand came up to cup her face. I didn't expect you either. Thought I'd teach you enough to survive. Watch you sell out in a year. Move on. Instead you're stuck with me. Best kind of stuck there is. He kissed her, slow and deep. Go to sleep, Clara. Tomorrow we start planning for real, combining herds, figuring out which property to focus on, all of it. Which property do you think? Yours. The house is smaller, but the land's better positioned. We can expand the barn, build onto the house. Make it ours instead of mine or yours. Clara liked the sound of that. Ours. A shared future. Built together. Sleep came easier than it had in weeks. The next morning brought the first real sign of spring. The temperature climbed above freezing and stayed there. Water dripped from the roof. Snow began to melt in earnest, and Clara could smell something in the air that wasn't just ice and cold. They started planning in earnest. Caleb drew up rough diagrams of how to expand the barn, where to add corrals, how to make the property work for a combined herd. Clara worked the numbers, calculating costs and profits and trying to build a budget that wouldn't break them. We'll need to hire help, Caleb said one evening, looking at the scope of work. Can't manage both properties and 50-some head of cattle with just the three of us. I can't afford to hire anyone. We can. Together. He tapped the ledger. My profit from this year's sale will cover it. We hire 2 good hands, pay them fair, and we'll triple our efficiency. You'd spend your profit on my ranch? Our ranch. Stop thinking in terms of yours and mine. It's ours now, or it will be once we're married. Caleb's expression was patient. You've got to start believing this is real, Clara. I'm not going to change my mind, and I'm not going anywhere. She was still adjusting to that truth. After years of being disposable, first to Thomas, then to her family, the idea that someone would choose her and keep choosing her felt foreign. I'm trying, she said quietly. I know. Caleb reached across the table to take her hand. And I'll keep reminding you until it sticks. Danny interrupted then, bursting through the door with unusual urgency. Boss, we got a problem. They followed him outside to find 3 of Clara's cattle down in the far pasture. Not dead, but sick. Staggering, frothing at the mouth, clearly in distress. Poison, Caleb said immediately, his face going hard. Someone poisoned them. Clara's stomach dropped. You're sure? Look at the symptoms. That's not natural. He was already moving, checking the other cattle, scanning for anything out of place. Danny, check the water trough. Look for anything that doesn't belong. Danny ran. Clara stood frozen, watching her cattle suffer, rage and helplessness warring in her chest. Caleb returned, his expression grim. The others seem fine. These 3 must have eaten something. Check the ground. Look for anything unusual. They searched in widening circles until Danny found it, a patch of grain scattered near the fence line, almost hidden in the melting snow. Caleb picked up a handful, sniffed it, and swore. This isn't cattle feed. It's been laced with something. Arsenic, maybe, or strychnine. He stood, his hands clenched into fists. Morrison. You don't know that, Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Who else would do this? Who else wants you gone badly enough to poison your stock? Caleb threw the grain down. I'm going to kill him. You're not. Clara grabbed his arm. That's exactly what he wants. You lose your head, do something stupid, and suddenly you're the criminal instead of him. So what, we just let him get away with it? We go to Sheriff Porter. We show him the evidence. We do this the right way. The 3 poisoned cattle died over the next hour, suffering through convulsions while Clara and Caleb did everything they could to ease their passing. By the time it was over, Clara was covered in sweat and sick to her stomach, and her herd was down to 10 head. 10. From 15 to 10 in one brutal winter. Caleb rode for the sheriff, while Clara and Danny disposed of the carcasses. Porter arrived an hour later, examined the scene with his characteristic thoroughness, and bagged samples of the grain. I'll test this, see if I can confirm what it is, he said. But even if I do, proving who put it here is another matter. Morrison's the only one with motive, Caleb said. Motive isn't proof. And Morrison's got friends who'll swear he was nowhere near here. Porter's expression was sympathetic but firm. I'll do what I can, but you need to prepare for the possibility that nothing comes of this. That's not good enough, Caleb said. It's the law. I enforce it. I don't make it. Porter turned to Clara. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. I know this is a hard loss, but if you two go after Morrison without proof, you'll be the ones in jail, not him. After Porter left, Clara sat on the porch steps and tried not to cry. 10 cattle. 10. It wasn't enough to sustain the ranch, not even close. She'd need to buy more stock, which meant more debt, which meant… Stop, Caleb said, sitting beside her. I can see you spiraling. Stop. I'm ruined. Don't you see that? 10 head won't cover my debts, won't buy supplies, won't… You're not ruined. We pool our herds, remember? 50 head between us, that's enough. That's your herd, your work. It's ours. Caleb's voice was firm. And we're not letting Morrison win. You hear me? We're not giving him the satisfaction. Clara leaned into him, letting his solid presence anchor her. I'm so tired of fighting. I know, but we're almost through it. Spring's here, the worst is behind us. We just have to hold on a little longer. She wanted to believe him. But the losses kept piling up, and her reserves, financial and emotional, were running dry. That night, Morrison's final offer arrived. A rider brought it, different from the last one, harder looking. He handed Clara the envelope and rode off without a word. Inside was a letter written in Morrison's neat script. $500 for the land and remaining cattle. Take it or leave it, but the offer expired in 1 week. Clara read it twice, then handed it to Caleb. He's pushing hard, Caleb said. Knows he's got you against the wall. What if I should take it? The words came out before Clara could stop them. What if I'm being stubborn for no reason? $500 would clear my debts, give me a fresh start. Where? Back east, where they still whisper about your scandal? Some other town where you'd have to start over again from nothing? Caleb's eyes were fierce. You belong here, Clara. This is your land, your home. Don't let him take that from you. But what if I can't make it work? What if… Then we fail together. But we don't quit, and we sure as hell don't hand Morrison a victory he doesn't deserve. Caleb pulled her close. You're stronger than this. Stronger than him. Stronger than the doubt. Remember who you were when you saved that calf? When you fixed that fence? When you stared down a Montana winter and survived? Clara closed her eyes. That feels like someone else. It was you. It's still you. You just forgot for a minute. He tipped her chin up, making her meet his eyes. We're getting married in a month. We're combining everything we have, and we're going to build something so solid that men like Morrison can't touch it. But you have to believe it's possible. I want to. Then start wanting and start doing. Burn that letter. Tell Morrison to go to hell. And let's focus on the wedding and the future instead of the fight. Clara took the letter from his hands and walked to the stove. She opened the door and threw it in, watching the paper catch and curl and burn. There, she said. Done. Caleb kissed her, hard and fierce. That's my girl. The week passed in a blur of preparation. They moved Caleb's cattle to Clara's property, consolidating the herd and making it easier to manage. They hired 2 ranch hands Caleb knew from neighboring spreads, good men who were reliable and didn't ask too many questions. They worked from dawn until dark, repairing winter damage and getting ready for spring calving. And they planned a wedding. Margaret took charge of the preparations with the efficiency of a military general. She coordinated with Widow Krantz on food, arranged for the ceremony to be held in the town's small chapel, and somehow bullied half of Red Hollow into contributing something: decorations, music, benches to sit on. Clara protested that it was too much, but Margaret waved her off. You two are the first bit of good news this town's had in a year. Let people celebrate. She thrust a list at Clara. Now, you need a dress. What do you have? Clara thought of her ruined Boston gowns, her work-worn clothes. Nothing appropriate. Then we'll make something. I've got fabric stored, and Sarah Mitchell used to be a seamstress before she married. We'll put together something simple but nice. 3 days before the wedding, Clara stood in Margaret's parlor while Sarah pinned and tucked fabric around her. The dress was nothing like the elaborate gowns she'd worn in Boston. Simple cotton dyed a soft cream, practical but pretty. You look beautiful, Margaret said. Clara barely recognized the woman in the mirror. She was leaner than she'd been, her face weathered by sun and wind, her hands rough with calluses. But her eyes were clear, and there was a strength in her posture that hadn't been there before. I look like I belong here, she said, surprised. That's because you do. Margaret adjusted the dress's sleeve. You earned it, Clara. Every bit of it. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold. Danny helped Clara load a wagon with her few belongings. She'd be moving to Caleb's place temporarily while they worked on expanding her house to accommodate them both. Most of what she owned fit in 3 crates. Amazing how little physical space a life could take up. Caleb met her at this chapel, cleaned up in a way she'd never seen. He'd shaved, trimmed his hair, and wore a suit that was probably 20 years old but still fit him well. When he saw her, something in his expression softened. "You look—" He stopped, shook his head. "I don't have words." "Good thing the vows are already written," Clara said, but her voice shook. They'd opted for a simple ceremony. Sheriff Porter stood as witness, Margaret beside Clara, Danny beside Caleb. The town crammed into the small chapel, curious and supportive in equal measure. The minister was an old man who traveled a circuit between frontier towns. He kept the ceremony short, blessedly free of flowery language, and asked only the essential questions. "Do you, Caleb Boone, take this woman to be your wife?" "I do." "Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your husband?" Clara looked at Caleb, this hard, honest man who'd taught her to survive, who'd believed in her when she didn't believe in herself, who'd offered her a partnership built on respect instead of obligation. "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Caleb kissed her, and the chapel erupted in applause. Clara felt tears on her cheeks and didn't bother to hide them. This was joy, pure and uncomplicated, and she let herself feel it completely. The celebration afterward was held in the same barn where they danced months ago. Someone had strung up lanterns, and tables groaned under the weight of contributed food. The same musicians played, and people danced with the same enthusiasm. But this time, when Caleb led Clara onto the floor, it was as husband and wife. "We did it," he said, holding her close. "We did." "Any regrets?" Clara looked around the barn, at the townspeople who'd become her community, at the life she'd built from nothing, at the future stretching out before them. Not a single one. They danced until her feet hurt and her sides ached from laughing. They ate too much and stayed too late and soaked in every moment of celebration because they both knew how rare joy was out here, how hard won. It was past midnight when they finally left, riding back to what was now their ranch under a sky full of stars. Danny had gone ahead to give them privacy, bless his tactful soul. Inside, Caleb built up the fire while Clara changed out of her wedding dress. When she emerged in her nightgown, he was standing by the window, looking out at the dark land. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I'm the luckiest man in Montana." He turned to face her. "That I get to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life, and that's worth more than all the cattle and land in the world." Clara crossed to him, her heart full. "I love you. I love you too." He pulled her close, his hand settling at her waist. "Mrs. Boone." "Mrs. Boone," Clara repeated, testing how it sounded. "I like it." They made love that night with the tenderness of newlyweds and the familiarity of partners who'd already weathered storms together. Afterward, Clara lay in Caleb's arms and listened to his heartbeat slow, felt the rise and fall of his chest, and let herself believe in forever. The next morning came too early, as all mornings on a ranch did. They woke to Danny knocking on the door, apologetic but urgent. "Boss, Caleb, we got a situation." They dressed quickly and followed him outside. In the pre-dawn light, Clara could see what had him worried. The cattle were spooked, milling nervously in the corral, and one of the fence sections was down. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the message scratched into the dirt near the gate. "Congratulations, hope it lasts." Caleb's whole body went rigid. "Morrison." "You don't know." "I know." He turned to Danny. "Get the other hands. I want this property locked down. No one comes or goes without us knowing about it." "Caleb," Clara said carefully, "what are you planning?" "I'm planning to protect what's mine. What's ours?" His eyes were hard. "Morrison's made his move. Now I make mine." "By doing what?" "Confronting him. That's necessary." Caleb's voice left no room for argument. "I let him poison your cattle, let him threaten and intimidate, and now he's trespassing on our land, leaving threats. It ends today. And if Porter arrests you for it, then he arrests me. But I'm not living under Morrison's shadow anymore." Caleb cupped her face. "Trust me, Clara. I'm not going to do anything stupid,
but I am going to make it crystal clear that this ranch is off limits.
He rode out before Clara could stop him, Danny trailing behind to keep him from doing anything too rash. Clara stood in the yard, watching them go, fear and frustration warring in her chest. The new hands, men named Cooper and Walsh, emerged from the bunkhouse to find her standing there. "Ma'am?" Cooper asked. "What do you need us to do?"
Clara made herself focus. Check every inch of fence. Look for breaks, weak spots, anywhere else someone might have gotten through. And check the feed storage, the water, everything. If there's poison or sabotage, I want to know about it. They nodded and got to work. Clara went into the house and tried to keep busy, but every sound made her jump. What was Caleb doing? Had he found Morrison? Were they talking or fighting or... She couldn't let herself think about the worst possibilities.
2 hours later, Caleb returned. Alone. His knuckles were bruised, his jaw tight, but he was walking and breathing and whole. "What did you do?" Clara demanded. "Had a conversation." Caleb dismounted stiffly. "Morrison and I reached an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" "The kind where I told him that if he sets foot on our property again, or if anything else happens to our cattle, I'll make him regret it in ways that have nothing to do with the law." Caleb's expression was grim, and he told me he had no idea what I was talking about, but that he'd be sure to stay away from our land from now on. "You hit him."
I might have. Conversation got heated. Caleb flexed his bruised hand, but Porter wasn't there to see it, and Morrison won't press charges because that would mean admitting he was anywhere near our ranch. Clara wanted to be angry at him for the recklessness, but mostly she was just relieved he was back. Did it work? Will he leave us alone? I think so. Morrison's a bully, and bullies back down when someone stands up to them hard enough. Caleb pulled her close. "I'm sorry. I know you wanted to handle this the right way, but I couldn't just sit back and wait for him to make another move." "I know." Clara leaned into him. "I just don't want to lose you to your own temper." "You won't, I promise." He kissed the top of her head. "Come on, let's check what Cooper and Walsh found. Make sure we're secure."
The inspection revealed no other damage, no more poison, nothing obviously wrong. Morrison's message seemed to have been just that, a message, not a prelude to something worse. Over the next week, they heard through the town grapevine that Morrison had suddenly decided to focus on his own property instead of acquiring more. Sheriff Porter stopped by once to ask if Caleb wanted to press charges for the trespassing, but Caleb declined.
"I think we've reached an understanding," he said, and Porter didn't push. Spring settled in properly, the snow melting to reveal brown grass that would soon turn green. The cattle calved successfully, adding to their herd. Clara worked alongside Caleb in their hands, learning the rhythm of a ranch that was actually thriving instead of just surviving. And slowly, cautiously, she let herself believe it was real, that they'd made it, that the worst was behind them. One evening in late April, she and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset. The land stretched out before them, theirs in a way that felt earned rather than inherited. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "That I'm happy." Clara took his hand. "Really, truly happy. For the first time in longer than I can remember." "Me too." He squeezed her fingers. "We did good, Clara. Built something worth keeping." She thought about everything it had taken to get here. The losses and the fear, the work and the risk. The choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. And she thought about what they'd built. Not just a ranch, but a life. A partnership. A future. "Yeah," she said softly. "We did." They sat like that until the stars came out. Two people who'd found each other in the hardest place imaginable and decided to stay. The cattle sale in May brought better prices than Clara had dared hope for. She and Caleb drove their combined herd to the rail station in Billings, a 3-day journey that tested every skill she'd learned over the past year. The cattle were in good condition, the market was strong, and when the final tally came in, they'd cleared enough profit to pay off her remaining debts, with money left over for improvements. Standing at the rail depot, with the bank draft in her hand, Clara felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since the day she'd arrived in Montana. "It's real," she said, staring at the numbers. Caleb looked over her shoulder. "What's real?" "This. We actually made it work." She turned to him, and there were tears in her eyes, though she was smiling. "I'm not in debt anymore, Caleb. For the first time since Uncle Henry died, I'm not drowning."
He pulled her into his arms right there in the middle of the busy depot, not caring who saw. Told you we'd make it. You did. I didn't always believe you. I know, but you stayed anyway. That's what mattered. They celebrated that night in a Billings hotel, a luxury they could finally afford. Clara took a real bath for the first time in months, washed her hair with actual soap instead of lye, and wore the one dress she owned that wasn't work-stained. Caleb cleaned up too, and they ate dinner in the hotel restaurant like civilized people instead of exhausted ranchers. I could get used to this, Clara said, savoring food she hadn't cooked herself. Don't get too used to it. We've got a ranch to run. But Caleb was smiling. Though maybe we can make this a tradition. Once a year after the sale, we take a few days for ourselves. I'd like that. They stayed 2 more days in Billings, buying supplies and equipment they'd needed but couldn't afford before. A new plow, better tools, wire for fencing, seeds for a kitchen garden Clara wanted to try. Caleb bought her a good saddle, custom fitted, over her protests that it was too expensive. You're riding every day for the rest of your life, he said. You need equipment that won't break your back, not negotiable. Clara ran her hand over the leather quality workmanship that would last decades. Thank you. Thank me by using it. The ride back to Red Hollow felt different than the journey out. They were heading home now, and Clara realized that word had changed meaning. Home wasn't Boston anymore, wasn't some abstract idea of where she was supposed to belong. Home was the ranch, the land they were building together, the life they were creating from hard work and stubbornness. They arrived to find Danny and the other hands had kept everything running smoothly in their absence. The spring calves were thriving, the expanded barn was taking shape, and Cooper had even started work on the addition to the house without being asked. Figured you'd want the extra room, he said when Clara questioned him. And we had the lumber and the time. She walked through the framed-out addition, imagining how it would look finished. A proper bedroom, a larger kitchen, maybe even a small parlor, space to grow into. What do you think? Caleb asked, appearing beside her. I think it's going to be perfect. They threw themselves into the work with renewed energy. The profit from the sale meant they could afford to do things right instead of making do with temporary fixes. They hired a carpenter from town to help with the house expansion, replaced all the rotting fence posts instead of just the worst ones, and bought breeding stock to improve their herd quality. By July, the house addition was finished. Clara stood in the new bedroom, running her hand along walls that still smelled of fresh-cut wood, and felt a surge of pride so strong it almost hurt. We built this, she said when Caleb joined her. We did. Not inherited it, not bought it with family money, built it ourselves. That we did. Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind. And we're not done yet. This is just the beginning. Clara leaned back against him, looking out the new window at land that stretched to the horizon. Sometimes I think about the woman who stepped off that stagecoach last year, how terrified she was, how certain she was going to fail. She didn't fail. No, but she became someone else. Someone I like better. Clara turned in his arms. I never thanked you properly for that, for seeing who I could be before I could see it myself. You did all the hard work. I just pointed you in the right direction. You did more than that. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That mattered, Caleb. It still matters. He kissed her, slow and thorough, and Clara felt the now familiar heat rise between them. They christened the new bedroom that afternoon, laughing and tangling in sheets that still smelled like the mercantile they'd come from, and Clara thought this imperfect, hard-won happiness was better than any fantasy she'd entertained back in Boston. August brought news that Morrison was selling out. The rumor came via Widow Krantz, who'd heard it from the bank manager, who'd heard it from Morrison's lawyer. Apparently he's moving to Denver, she told Clara when she stopped by the boarding house for supplies. Says frontier life doesn't agree with him anymore. Clara felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and something that might have been pity. Did he get a good price? Better than he offered you, that's for sure, but he's selling at a loss from what he paid originally. Widow Krantz's eyes gleamed. Seems like karma has a sense of humor. When Clara told Caleb that evening, he just grunted. Good riddance. Man like that was never going to make it out here anyway. Takes more than money and meanness to survive this land. What does it take? Clara asked, curious what he'd say. Caleb thought about it. Stubbornness, flexibility, the ability to fail and get back up and try again, and someone to fail and succeed with.
No one makes it alone out here. Not really. Is that your way of saying you need me? I'm saying we need each other. There's a difference. He pulled her onto his lap. I could survive alone. Did it for years. But I don't want to anymore. Life's better shared, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard.
Clara kissed him, tasting the truth of that. They'd survived this year not just because they were individually strong, but because they'd been stronger together. When one faltered, the other held steady. When both struggled, they found strength in the shared burden. That was the thing about this life, Clara was learning. It didn't get easier, but you got stronger. And if you were lucky enough to find someone to build alongside, the strength compounded. September came with the first hints of autumn. The days were still warm, but the nights turned cool, and Clara could smell winter coming on the wind. But this year, the thought didn't terrify her. They were prepared. The barn was stocked with hay, the house was weathertight, and they had enough cattle to sustain losses without catastrophe. More importantly, they knew what to expect. The fear of the unknown had been replaced by the confidence of experience. Danny came to them one evening with news that he'd been offered a foreman position at a larger ranch to the south. Better pay, more responsibility, he said, looking torn. But I wanted to tell you first in case you wanted to make a counteroffer. Clara and Caleb exchanged glances. They'd talked about this possibility, knowing Danny was too talented to stay a regular hand forever. We can't match what they're offering, Caleb said honestly. Not yet, but if you want to stay, we'll make you foreman here. Same responsibility, just less pay for now. Danny grinned. I'd rather have less pay and work for people I trust. If the offer's real, I'm staying. They shook on it, and Clara felt grateful once again for the loyalty this hard land seemed to inspire in good people. Danny had proven himself a dozen times over, and she trusted him with their livelihood. October brought Clara's first real indication that their life was about to change in a fundamental way. She'd been tired lately, more than usual, and certain smells made her stomach turn. When she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she rode to town to see the doctor. He confirmed what she'd already suspected. About 3 months along, Dr. Harrison said, an elderly man who'd delivered half the babies in the territory. You're healthy, the pregnancy seems normal. Just take care of yourself. First winter with a baby on the way can be tricky. Clara rode back to the ranch in a daze, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. A baby. She was going to have Caleb's baby. The timing was terrible. Winter coming, the ranch still demanding every ounce of energy they had, and also somehow perfect. She found Caleb in the barn, working on a broken stall door. He took one look at her face and set down his tools. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Clara took his hands and placed them on her stomach. I'm pregnant. About 3 months. Caleb went very still. For a moment, Clara couldn't read his expression at all, and panic spiked through her. What if he didn't want this? What if... Then his face broke into a smile so wide and genuine it transformed him. A baby? A baby. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like she'd never heard him laugh before. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. We're having a baby, he said, like testing the words. We are. Due sometime in April, the doctor thinks. April. Caleb's hand stayed on her stomach, protective and wondering. Right after calving season. Your timing observation skills are impressive, Clara said dryly. I just meant... He stopped, shook his head. I don't have words for what I meant. I'm happy, Clara, scared as hell, but happy. Me too. She covered his hand with hers, but we can do this, right? Run a ranch and raise a child? People have been doing both since ranching existed. We'll figure it out. He pulled her close, careful now in a way he hadn't been before. We've survived everything else this land's thrown at us. We'll survive this too. The pregnancy changed things in subtle ways. Caleb became almost comically protective, trying to take over Clara's usual tasks until she threatened to hit him with a fence post if he didn't stop. They compromised. She'd avoid the heaviest work and the most dangerous tasks, but she wasn't going to sit idle for 6 months. The ranch hands reacted with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Danny was thrilled. Cooper was quietly congratulatory. And Walsh, who had 6 children of his own, offered mostly warnings about sleepless nights and chaos. Don't listen to him, Danny said. Babies are easy. They eat, sleep, and cry. How hard can it be? Walsh just laughed. The town celebrated when word spread. Margaret organized a gathering to make baby clothes and supplies, and Clara found herself on the receiving end of more generosity than she'd expected. People brought blankets, baby gowns sewn from flour sacks, advice both solicited and not. "You're one of us now," Widow Krantz said, pressing a beautifully knitted blanket into Clara's hands. "This town takes care of its own." Clara had to excuse herself to cry in the back room, overwhelmed by the acceptance she'd fought so hard to earn. Winter that year was milder than the last. Or maybe Clara was just better prepared for it. The cold didn't shock her anymore, and the endless work felt manageable instead of overwhelming. She moved slower as the pregnancy progressed, but she kept moving, kept working, kept contributing. Caleb hovered but tried to hide it, which Clara found endearing even when it was annoying. He'd built a rocking chair for the nursery corner they'd sectioned off in the bedroom, carved it himself from wood he'd been saving. When he showed it to her, Clara cried, which happened a lot these days. "It's perfect," she managed. "It's crooked. Look at the arms. They're not quite even." "I don't care. It's perfect because you made it." January brought the coldest night of the season. Clara woke shivering despite the fire and the blankets and Caleb's warmth beside her. The baby was active, moving in ways that felt both strange and miraculous. "Can't sleep?" Caleb murmured, only half awake. "Your child is practicing dance routines at 2 a.m. He placed his hand on her swollen stomach, and Clara felt the baby kick against his palm. The wonder on his face made her heart ache in the best way. "Strong," he said. "Takes after the father." "Stubborn like the mother, probably." Caleb kissed her temple. "Get some sleep. Morning comes early." But Clara lay awake, thinking about the life growing inside her, about the future they were building. This baby would be born into hardship, no question. Ranch life didn't pause for infants, but the baby would also be born into love, into a partnership that had been tested and proven strong, into a community that would rally around them. That was worth more than comfort or ease. That was worth everything. February brought false spring again, temperatures warming just enough to be cruel before winter reasserted itself. March was mud season, everything melting and refreezing and turning the ranch into a mess of ice and muck. And then April arrived, bringing green grass and wildflowers and the start of calving season. Clara was helping with a difficult birth, staying back, just watching and advising while Danny did the hands-on work, when her water broke. She stood there in the barn, feeling the warm rush, and thought with distant humor that of course this would happen during calving. Of course. "Danny," she said calmly, "go get Caleb, now." The young man looked at her, saw her face, and ran. Caleb arrived at full gallop, nearly falling off his horse in his haste. Are you? "It's time." Clara took his offered arm, surprised by how calm she felt. "We should get to the house, and someone needs to ride for Dr. Harrison." Cooper volunteered to fetch the doctor while Walsh helped Clara to the house. The contractions started in earnest as she settled into bed, and Clara discovered that all the hard physical work of the past year had prepared her for exactly nothing when it came to childbirth. Labor was brutal. Hours of pain that built and crested and never quite broke, leaving her exhausted and desperate. Dr. Harrison arrived and pronounced everything normal, which Clara would have disputed if she'd had the energy. Caleb stayed beside her the whole time, letting her crush his hand during contractions, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement that probably would have annoyed her if she'd been capable of coherent thought. "I can't," she gasped at one point, maybe hours in, maybe days. "Caleb, I can't do this." "You can. You're the strongest person I know." His voice was steady, even though his face was pale. "You survived a Montana winter. You can survive this. That was easier." "I know, but you're almost there, just a little longer." The baby came finally in the gray light of dawn, sliding into the world with an indignant cry that made Clara laugh through her tears. A girl, small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly. Dr. Harrison cleaned her and wrapped her and placed her in Clara's arms. "Congratulations, Mrs. Boone. You've got a fighter." Clara looked down at her daughter, and felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of the world. This tiny person, red-faced and furious and absolutely perfect, was hers, was theirs. "She's beautiful," Caleb said, his voice rough. He touched the baby's tiny fist with one scarred finger, and the infant grabbed on with surprising strength, just like her mother.
She's going to be trouble, Clara said. I can tell already. Good. This land needs troublemakers.
They named her Sarah, after Caleb's mother. Sarah Boone, born on a cattle ranch in Montana Territory, surrounded by mud and wildflowers and the promise of spring. The first weeks were exactly as hard as Walsh had warned. Sarah nursed constantly, slept rarely, and had opinions about everything that she expressed at full volume. Clara was exhausted beyond anything she'd experienced, including winter ranch work, but she was also happier than she'd ever been. Watching Caleb with their daughter was a revelation. This hard man, scarred and gruff, turned gentle when he held Sarah. He'd walk her around the house at night when she wouldn't settle, singing old cattle songs in his rough voice until she finally dozed off. He'd change her without complaint when Clara was too tired to move, and he'd stare at her like she was the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. "You're good at this," Clara told him one night, watching him rock Sarah in the chair he'd made. "I'm terrified I'm going to break her." "You're not. You're doing great." "We're doing great," he corrected. "This is teamwork, same as everything else." And it was. They split the work of caring for Sarah the same way they split ranch work. Whoever had the energy handled it, no keeping score, no resentment. Some days Clara did more, some days Caleb did, and most days they were both so tired they just survived moment to moment. But they survived together. By June, they'd found their rhythm. Sarah was sleeping in longer stretches, Clara was mostly recovered from the birth, and the ranch was thriving. They had 60 head of cattle now, plus the new calves. The house expansion had proven its worth a dozen times over. They'd hired another hand to help with the increased work, a young woman named Ruth, who'd grown up on a ranch and could outwork most men Clara knew. "We're building something," Clara said one evening, sitting on the porch with Sarah drowsing in her arms and Caleb beside her. "Something that'll last." "We are." Caleb's arm came around her shoulders. "What do you think Henry would say if he could see this place now?" Clara thought about her uncle, the man she'd met twice and barely remembered. "I think he'd be proud. He left me land and debt, and we turned it into a real ranch." "He left you a chance. You did the rest." "We did the rest." The cattle sale that year brought even better prices. They cleared enough profit to fully stock the ranch for winter and still put money aside. Standing at the depot with the bank draft, Clara thought about how different this felt from last year. Last year had been relief at survival. This year was satisfaction at success. "We should celebrate," Caleb said. "Hotel in Billings again? I was thinking something bigger. What if we took Sarah to Denver for a few days? Let her see a real city before she's old enough to be unimpressed." Clara laughed. "She's 5 months old. She's going to be unimpressed regardless." "True, but we could still go. Make it a family trip." The word family still made Clara's chest feel warm. Family. That's what they were now. Not just husband and wife, rancher and partner, but a family. They made the trip to Denver in September, leaving the ranch in Danny's capable hands. The city was overwhelming after a year and a half of frontier life. So many people, so much noise, buildings that reached multiple stories into the sky. Sarah hated it, crying at the unfamiliar sounds, and honestly, Clara understood the impulse. But they enjoyed it anyway. They ate in restaurants, visited shops, and stayed in a hotel that had indoor plumbing and gas lights. Clara bought fabric for new clothes, Caleb bought books, and they spoiled Sarah with a proper cradle that they'd have shipped back to Red Hollow. On their last night, they ate dinner in the hotel restaurant while Sarah slept in the cradle beside their table. Clara looked around at the well-dressed people, the fancy surroundings, the life she could have had if she'd made different choices. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked, reading her mind. "Not a single one." Clara reached across the table to take his hand. "This is better. We're better." "We are." He squeezed her fingers. "Ready to go home?" "More than ready." The trip back to Red Hollow felt right in a way the journey to Denver hadn't. They were heading towards something instead of away from it. When the ranch came into view, Clara felt her shoulders relax in a way they hadn't since they'd left. "Home," she said. "Home," Caleb agreed. The second winter was easier than the first, though still hard. Clara had learned the rhythms now, knew when to push and when to rest, knew how to judge the sky and the stock and their supplies. And having Sarah changed everything. The baby gave structure to the days, broke up the monotony of endless work with moments of pure joy. Sarah took her first steps in February, tottering between Caleb and Clara in the main room, while Danny and the hands cheered her on. She said her first word, "Da," in March, which made Caleb impossibly smug until Sarah's second word was "mama," and Clara got to return the smugness. By the time spring came around again, Clara had been in Montana for 2 full years. 2 years since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and certain she'd fail. 2 years since Caleb had saved her from a gunfight and changed her life without either of them knowing it. She was 26 now, a rancher's wife, a mother, a woman who could birth a calf and fix a fence and negotiate cattle prices without flinching. The scandal that had driven her from Boston felt like something that had happened to someone else in a different lifetime, because it had, in a way. That frightened, proper woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, harder, better suited for the life she'd chosen. One afternoon in late April, Clara was working in the garden she'd finally managed to establish, vegetables and herbs and a few flowers that Margaret had given her, when Widow Krantz's wagon pulled into the yard. The older woman climbed down with more difficulty than she'd had 2 years ago, and Clara felt a pang of concern. Widow Krantz was aging, no denying it. "Brought you something," the widow said, pulling an envelope from her coat. "Came to the boarding house by mistake. Return address says Boston." Clara's stomach dropped. She took the envelope with the hands that wanted to shake, recognizing her mother's handwriting on the front. "You all right?" Widow Krantz asked. "Fine. Thank you for bringing it." Clara forced a smile. "Would you like some coffee?" "Can't stay. Got other deliveries." But the widow's sharp eyes missed nothing. "That from family?" "My mother." "You going to open it?" Clara looked at the envelope, at the careful script, at the evidence that her past hadn't forgotten her even if she'd mostly forgotten it. Eventually. "Take my advice, learned from experience. The past is only as powerful as you let it be." Widow Krantz climbed back onto her wagon. "You've built a good life here. Don't let an old one mess it up." After she left, Clara sat on the porch steps and stared at the letter. Part of her wanted to burn it unopened. Part of her needed to know what it said. Finally, she slid her finger under the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. The letter was short. Her mother wrote that Clara's father had died the previous winter, that the scandal had mostly faded from memory, that if Clara wanted to come home, return to Boston, all would be forgiven. Clara read it twice, then once more to make sure she understood. They wanted her back. After 2 years of silence, of abandonment, they wanted her to return as if nothing had happened, as if she could just slip back into the life they'd mapped out for her, older and wiser and properly chastened by her frontier adventure. She found Caleb in this barn, teaching Sarah how to brush a very patient horse. Their daughter was chattering nonsense, and Caleb was responding like she was making perfect sense. "Letter from my mother," Clara said, handing it to him. He read it, his expression darkening. "They want you back." "They do? What do you want?" Clara looked around the barn, at the tools they'd bought together, the stalls they'd repaired, the life they'd built board by board. She looked at Sarah, happy and healthy and fearless. She looked at Caleb, this man who'd believed in her when no one else had, who'd taught her to be strong, who loved her not despite her flaws, but including them. "I want exactly what I have," she said. "I want this ranch, this life, you and Sarah. I want to watch our daughter grow up tough and capable. I want to build this into something we can pass down to her someday. I want everything we've fought for and nothing they're offering." Caleb's smile was slow and genuine. "Then tell them that." Clara did. She sat at the kitchen table that night and wrote a letter that was both harder and easier than she'd expected. She told her mother about Caleb, about Sarah, about the ranch. She expressed sympathy for her father's death, but made it clear she wouldn't be returning. She wished them well and signed it simply Clara Boone. She mailed it the next time she was in town and didn't look back. The years that followed fell into a pattern. Not easy, but steady. Good years and bad years, profits and losses, triumphs and disasters. They had 2 more children, a boy they named Henry and another girl named Anna. The ranch grew as their family grew, expanding to over 100 head of cattle and enough land to sustain them. Danny eventually married Ruth, the ranch hand they'd hired, and they built a house on the property's eastern edge. Cooper retired but stayed on as a consultant of sorts, teaching the younger hands the skills he'd spent a lifetime acquiring. The community around Red Hollow grew too, becoming less a collection of desperate survivors and more a real town. Morrison never came back. They heard he'd failed at business in Denver and moved further west, always chasing something he'd never find. Clara thought about him sometimes, about how his bitterness and greed had cost him everything while her willingness to work and adapt had given her everything. There was a lesson in that, she thought, about what mattered and what didn't, about the difference between taking and building. By the time Sarah was 10, she could ride as well as her father and had opinions about cattle breeding that made the ranch hands laugh. Henry was 8 and fearless to the point of giving Clara gray hairs. Anna was 6 and had already declared she was going to be a rancher when she grew up, not a rancher's wife, an important distinction. Clara stood on the porch one evening watching all 3 children chase each other through the yard while Caleb worked on a new corral section. The house had been expanded twice more and now sprawled comfortably across the land. The barn was enormous, the cattle healthy, the future secure. "You look thoughtful," Margaret said, appearing beside her. The schoolteacher visited regularly now, having become one of Clara's closest friends. "Just thinking about how far we've come, how different this is from what I expected." "Better or worse?" Clara laughed. "So much better it's not even a comparison. That life in Boston, being proper and reputable and miserable, I can't even imagine going back to it." "You wouldn't fit anymore? You've gone native," Margaret said it with affection. "You're one of us now, through and through." "I am," Clara said it with satisfaction. "This is who I was always supposed to be. I just had to come to the middle of nowhere to figure it out." Caleb finished with the corral and walked over, Sarah climbing onto his shoulders and Henry and Anna trailing behind. He looked tired. They all did, bone-deep tired that came from work that never truly ended, but content. "Children are fed?" Clara asked. "Not yet. Figured we'd all eat together." They did, crowding around the expanded table that had been built to accommodate their growing family and the hands who ate with them more often than not. The conversation was loud and chaotic, everyone talking over each other, Sarah arguing with Henry about whose turn it was to feed the chickens, while Anna spilled her milk and cried about it. It was messy and imperfect, and exactly what Clara had needed without knowing it. Later, after the children were in bed and the house had finally quieted, Clara and Caleb sat on the porch like they had that first spring. The stars were out, brilliant in the way they could only be far from city lights. 15 years, Caleb said, since you got off that stagecoach looking like you'd stepped into hell by mistake. 15 years since you saved me from a gunfight. Best decision I ever made. Clara leaned against him, comfortable and solid and home. What do you think the next 15 years look like? More of this. Kids growing up, ranch growing with them, getting older, hopefully getting wiser. He paused. You ever miss it? The easy life? This is the easy life, or at least the right one. Clara turned to look at him. Everything I ran from in Boston, the judgment, the expectations, the feeling like I was always failing at being what I was supposed to be, none of that matters here. Out here, you're judged on what you do, not who your family is or what scandal you were involved in. You fail and get back up and try again, and nobody holds it against you. That's romanticizing it a bit. Plenty of people out here hold grudges. Fair. But the land doesn't. The cattle don't. The work doesn't care about your past, only whether you're willing to do it. Clara took his hand. I like that. I like being judged on my own merit. You've more than proven your merit. We've proven ours. Together. She squeezed his fingers. That's the thing I couldn't have imagined back then. That partnership could feel like this. That building a life with someone could be hard and frustrating and still be the best thing I've ever done. Caleb pulled her closer, and they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. This was what they'd built. Not just a successful ranch or a thriving family, but a life that mattered, a legacy that would outlast them. A story of survival and stubbornness, and the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. Clara thought about that woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 15 years ago, desperate and scared and certain she was making a terrible mistake. She wished she could tell that woman what waited for her. The pain, yes, but also the joy. The losses, but also the victories. The endless work, but also the deep satisfaction of building something that would last. She wished she could tell her it would all be worth it. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who didn't need reassurance anymore. Someone who knew her own strength, who trusted her partner completely, who faced each day with confidence born of experience rather than hope. Sarah appeared at the door, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama? Had a bad dream." Clara stood, holding out her hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you back to bed." She tucked Sarah in, singing the old cattle songs Caleb had taught her, and thought about the cycle of it all. How she'd been taught, and now she taught. How the ranch would someday be Sarah's if she wanted it, or Henry's, or Anna's. How this life would continue beyond Clara and Caleb, built on the foundation they'd laid together. That night, Clara dreamed of spring, of wildflowers covering the range and calves running on new legs, and Sarah laughing as Caleb taught her to rope. She dreamed of Henry helping with the haying and Anna charming the ranch hands into doing her chores. She dreamed of years stretching ahead, hard and beautiful, and worth every ounce of effort they'd require. She dreamed of home. When she woke, Caleb was already up, probably checking on a cow he'd been worried about. Clara dressed and went to help. Because that's what partners did. That's what you did when you'd built a life you believed in. The sun was rising over the Montana range, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The cattle were lowing in the distance. Sarah was chattering to Henry in the kitchen, and somewhere Anna was probably getting into something she shouldn't. It was chaos and work and responsibility that would never end. It was perfect. Clara had come to Montana running from disgrace, expecting to fail, hoping only to survive long enough to figure out what came next. Instead, she'd found herself. She'd found love and partnership and strength she'd never known she possessed. She'd found a place where her past didn't define her, where her mistakes could be forgiven, where she was judged only on her willingness to show up and do the work. She'd found home. And that, Clara thought as she headed out to help Caleb with the morning chores, was worth more than all the respectability and comfort Boston could have ever offered. Worth more than easy promises or soft living. Worth everything. The frontier had a way of stripping people down to their essential selves, of revealing what they were made of. Some broke under the pressure, some ran, and some, the stubborn ones, the determined ones, the ones who refused to quit no matter how hard it got, they thrived. Clara had thrived, and watching the sun rise over land she'd helped build into something lasting, surrounded by a family she'd created with a man who'd believed in her from the start. She knew she'd made the right choice, every brutal, difficult, beautiful choice that had led her here. She was Clara Boone, rancher, wife, mother. Once a scandal-ridden refugee from Boston society, now a woman who'd earned her place through sweat and stubbornness and the refusal to give up. This was her legacy. This was her life, and she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.